I mean, so, like, where did you guys first encounter Resident Evil?
Oh, for me, my very first encounter with it was I never had a PlayStation. I had the N64 in that era.
Oh,
And,
so that was your choice, yeah? You went the
yeah,
Nintendo route, yeah?
I was always Nintendo loyal up until the Wii, when it just got a bit gimmicky. Now, I mean, I do defend the Wii because it's the only video game console I ever got to play with my grandmother.
Right.
So there's happy like Christmas Day memories of that, but beyond that, it was a bit shit as a console. But beyond that, I've always been Nintendo. But a friend of mine had a PlayStation, and I remember he got the Resident Evil game, and I remember the cartridge of the box like that the CD was in.
Yeah.
But my defining memory of that is that the cover didn't match the game.
No.
Because the cover was this kind of slightly furious looking soldier who looked like Ash from Evil Dead, and the game is just the cover is just him holding this shotgun, looking right intense.
I mean,
and I just saw that and thought it was going to be another Doom clone, just running around shooting monsters. And I'd played enough games like that, so I had zero interest in it. It was only years later that I realised actually that cover doesn't match the tone of the game at all.
Like at all? No, I don't know quite what they were going with. I don't even know who. Is it supposed to be Chris? Is it supposed to be Chris Redfield?
I assume so, based on soldier uniform. Yeah,
very peculiar, and it really doesn't match the tone of the game at all.
No, it's it was the first of its kind, though. I mean, going back a little bit further than where we were in the conversation, but there were no survival horrors before this, really.
No, I mean, it's a really odd thing to think, isn't it? That it wasn't. I mean, there were games that were sort of proto-survival horror, things like the Alone in the Dark and whatnot, but weren't quite survival horror. But Resident Evil was the one that really established it. I mean, horror video gaming, it did exist, but it was a very different beastie. It was a very different beastie at that point. I mean, if you did you guys, like, earlier on, did you have consoles like the Commodore Amiga or anything like that?
My first proper one was a Super Nintendo.
Right.
And whilst there were horror games on that, it was just stuff like Metroid or Castlevania, where it's basically just still a platform game, except the stuff you're shooting is monsters rather than, turtles or whatever.
Because of course the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo in general in the West was marketed primarily at children, so a lot of the more sincere horror titles that you did get in Japan on those platforms didn't come out here at all. Things like Clock Tower.
I've never even heard of that. No.
Really? Oh, Clock Tower. I'd advise going and watching a Let's Play or something on YouTube, because that is a spectacular piece of work. It's a genuine horror game, and it even has survival horror elements in the 16-bit era, but it was never released here, unfortunately.
Yeah, Clock Tower was one of the first, if not the first ever, and then there were a spate of games that came out on the computer, PC CD-ROM stuff.
Yeah.
They never loaded it, but they had the element of, let's try and find one key in this entire building that will solve this. Avoid enemies rather than fighting them, all we've got's a knife.
Yeah.
I think it was Dracula's, was something to do like Dracula's. When you said Clock Tower, I thought it was one there, and basically you had 24 hours in real time to go inside and find your wife inside this house.
I can't 100% remember that one. Was that like an FMV game, that one? Like a full motion video thing?
No, it was a hell of a lot of cutscenes, and because it was all access to CD-ROM, basically you walk through a door and then spend like 2 or 3 minutes waiting for it to
load. Yeah, of course. I mean, even way back when there were horror video games. There was in the UK like a little cottage industry of horror video games back in the this was the pre-16-bit era, so this was even before like the Mega Drive and the SNES came out. There were companies like Horrorsoft, which was like a spin-off of Adventuresoft, and they would create these very, very bog basic, very dense horror RPGs where you couldn't actually play them unless you had graph paper, a pen and pencil, and a notepad beside the computer.
Amazing.
Because, I mean, you can find Let's Plays of them on YouTube, so people have actually sat down and played these damn games. And by present-day standards, you watch them, and it's like, how could anyone ever have been scared of these? you know. But of course, it's all contextual, isn't it? Like at the time, we didn't have anything to measure them against. So yeah,
the limitations would have seemed far less. It's not like you were sat there saying, "Oh, I can't wait till horror games are in 3D."
Of
you wouldn't have known any different.
Well,
so that would have been.
I was a kid at the time these things were coming out. I mean, I was like a proper kid, like 5 or 6 years old, and I remember getting demos on. You know, when magazines had demo discs on the front, they had like floppy discs on the front. So you had demos of the games on them. I remember getting demos of the horror games and being absolutely terrified of them because you hadn't encountered horror in this format before. You know, we'd seen them on VHS, we'd read horror in novels, we'd seen horror in comic books, but we hadn't actually seen horror in video games before.
From my memory, it wasn't prevalent. I'm trying to figure out Lex's age earlier because I always know I am based on how old he is. I'm 6 months older than Lex.
Right.
And my introduction to horror was very different in that I've got 2 older brothers and an older sister, by 17 years. So when I was 4 or 5, they were in their early 20s, and they were bringing up lots of horror films. We never had a console, but we had so many video nasties it was untrue. I watched all those as a child, so I've missed it. Like, various girlfriends have said, have you not seen this Disney film, or that Disney film, or this John? And I'm like, how have you not seen Hellraiser? or Bride of Chucky? I've seen all these films till I was bored of them. So I lost that sensitivity to them.
Of course. I think I do think that's a generational thing. I mean, I think we've discussed this, haven't we, Lex? How I'm 36, so I'm pretty much of the same age, barring a year or so. It's as though our generation actually grew up with horror in the home, with horror media as it has developed itself, and that's no more true as it is in video games. I mean, horror in video games in the pre-16-bit era was so bog basic, it was unbelievable. The horror soft stuff, its horror consists of still images that are they're quite horrific in and of themselves, but they are literally just still images. There's hardly any animation at all.
There was around, if you're our age, we'll all be at a certain age where you were about 6 or 7 when Jamie Bulger went missing.
Of course.
Yeah.
Following that, there was a massive backlash in British media about video nasties. And
there was,
I've always looked through newspapers from being a kid. Like, you know the cartoons at the back where I like skip through, might be something interesting. I remember that coming up, and one video game got targeted. It wasn't with regards to a Jamie Bulger thing, but it was like they'd already, the Merry White House crew had already,
of course,
slapped the thing on horror films. There was another video game, and I remember them showing stills of it in the newspaper. And basically, it was a woman in a towel getting attacked by a man in a balaclava with a chainsaw, and it was actually being filmed.
Right.
I bet that was on the Sega CD or something, because there was a load of games that were basically like a film, and you just pressed the button periodically. And I think it was one of them. I think I remember which one you're talking about. Actually,
I think it was probably Night Trap. Because there were 2 video games that were primarily targeted by sort of the right-wing press in this country in a sort of moral backlash that resulted in the creation of the ESPA, the rating system that's on the back of video games to this day, and they were Mortal Kombat, obviously, and Night Trap. And
I've just googled it now. It's Night Trap.
Night Trap, Night Trap is almost, for some reason, the media really fell on Night Trap, and yet ostensibly it's a horror game. But if you watch it, if you actually go to YouTube and you play it now, it's the goofiest, stupidest, funniest thing you have ever seen. It's not even intended to be a serious horror game. You can tell. It's more like,
even at the time.
Even at the time, it was intended to be a parody. It was ridiculous. And in fact, you see nothing in it. There's no blood, there's no violence, there's no actual deaths that occur in it. It's the stupidest game imaginable. But for some reason, the press really got their teeth into it, and they had this incredible incredible moral reaction to it, where they were proclaiming that, oh, children are being taught to murder these young women and blah 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 blah. Of course, the people who were writing the articles had never actually played the damn game.
No,
And
of course they haven't. No.
the irony is the game isn't even that good. It's actually really bad. Like a lot of these FMV games were on the Sega CD, where there's no gameplay.
You just click.
You don't do anything. You just watch these films, and you have to press a button at a particular allocated time.
I remember that was happening, and I remember my brothers being a bit annoyed and a bit smug because a lot of the films that they liked were getting banned, but they were also smug because we'd already got them on VHS.
Of course, so they were all right, yeah.
They were good. They were golden. And around,
but that backlash. I mean, there were a lot of films that were completely buried up until the early 2000s. Things like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for example.
Yeah, and Clockwork Orange was buried until. Oh, but that was Kubrick's own personal choice.
He actually had that taken off shelves, didn't he?
Yeah, he got sick of the publicity from it. But the tailing into computer games and Resident Evil from that particular video nasty thing is just as a boy, I was into physical toys. I never had a computer console. My kids had one. It was like a dragon or something like that, and I played it, and it wasn't very good. It wasn't very entertaining, and I was never good at a computer game. When I was around 15, all my friends started talking about Resident Evil. I'd never had a computer game before in my life. I hadn't played them before in my life, apart from at friends' houses to go, I'm dead, I don't really care. And then my friends suddenly started talking around about Resident Evil, about how it was very different to every other game. There was an advert on TV which wasn't something that really that made it out to be like a film, and I'd grown up watching horror films, so I love zombies, I love monsters.
Right, so the notion of a video game that was essentially designed to be like playing a horror film.
A horror film you could play, and that's when my friends were bringing in, like prior to the dawn of the internet as it is now, they were bringing in like magazines for cheat codes or walkthroughs, and I would read these walkthroughs of this Resident Evil game and think, this looks amazing, I want to see it. I didn't think I would play it, I just wanted to witness what they were witnessing, like I'd done with the film. It was an entirely new concept. So I hassled my mother and father, and I got PlayStation 1 with Resident Evil 2, and then I bought Resident Evil 1, it was in the classics range. Where you could get them like a game that sold so many for £20. And that was literally my introduction to gaming and Resident Evil and survival horror all in one go.
Right, so Resi for you has a really particular resonance, because it's almost like it's tied up with your introduction to video gaming.
Yeah, and socially as well. Another reason why I never had computer games is it was always my friends being like, "Oh, we'll rent this game, come around," and I didn't. It's something me and Lex bonded over when we first started talking. Is we either didn't have any friends where we lived, or we lived very far away from where the rest of our thing was. So I travelled like 5 or 6 miles a day to get to school. All my friends at school lived within the streets around the school. So when I went home, I had no one to go out and play with.
That was the same for me as well. Yeah, all my school friends lived nowhere near me. So just like Casey, once I was at home, unless it was a specially arranged they're coming to your house sort of thing, you couldn't just nip round to someone's house and call on them. There were none of that because everyone was too far away from where I lived.
Right, so stuff like video games or anything like that, they were sort of ideal in many respects.
Well, actually, no. Horror films were great because I could watch them on my own. Guitar I could play on. Whatever the hell else I did on my own as a teenage boy, probably just painting Warhammer. I could sit and do that on my own.
Of course, yeah.
Video games, there'd be no point in me getting a computer console and FIFA or WrestleMania or anything like that, because I didn't have any friends around to play with them.
Right, so anything that involved like multiple players or anything like that, it was just out of the window, yeah?
Yeah, and I disliked gaming, because whenever I went to friends, I sucked at gaming because I'd never experienced it, and I didn't know what to do. The controls were awkward. Whereas suddenly something that was like, hey, you like horror, this is a horror film, and you can play it. And you can play it on your own. You don't need friends for this one. You can play it at 4 a.m. in the dark through headphones. You don't have to have a room full of mates screaming you and encouraging you on.
Yeah, this is a singular experience. You know, this is something for one player to experience on their own. In fact, that's when it's most ideal, of course. That's when it's scariest.
Yeah, exactly. And that sort of like, what's the word I'm looking for? That zeitgeist, for me personally, which is why Resident Evil is, and is still to this day my favourite set of computer games, because it was suddenly the anti-video game. You didn't need friends, and it didn't need to be a computer. It didn't need to be like a Gran Turismo style game or a beat 'em up or Tony Hawk's Part 17 or anything like that. It was like you're shooting zombies in the head with shotguns. Here it is, and you can play it, and it's got a story.
And I suppose, you know, part of it was technical limitation as well. I mean, up until that point, video games just couldn't recreate the experience of being in a horror film.
Yeah, and I've not played many games from before that sort of ilk, but it was around that time that they decided on this pre-rendered backdrop. It was beautifully painted, and then your character was just animated over the top of it, but it allowed them to have so much more scale. Lex and I have talked about survival horror before with Silent Hill, with the fog.
Of course.
The Resident Evil version of that is, rather than having a moving camera that had to animate every single possible angle that your character can, it's just have these locked shots like their camera, like their security cameras, and have your character move around within that.
Yeah, that is, I mean, it's part of the sincere genius of the original Resident Evil games, the locked-off camera. Not only does that, it allows the PlayStation to process a bit faster. You know, the fact that you have these pre-rendered backgrounds, which, by the way, look gorgeous. At the time, they were really impressive.
They do, because they don't have to change the lighting and the camera every time your character moves. So you can just get this beautiful painted image and just lock that in, and that is it. However you move within that image, the lighting doesn't change or anything. It was a way of getting around the technical limitations, which was really clever.
But it also helps the horror as well, because you can't always see where things are coming from. You can hear them. You can often hear sort of a squelch or a groan or something, but you can't see beyond the bounds of the camera. And that makes for some really tense moments. I always remember, you know, that hallway that's just off the dining room where you encounter the first zombie?
Yeah.
That hallway was always one of the most terrifying areas in the game for me, because you can't see very far up it.
Yeah.
There's a corner and there's a door, and there is often a zombie around that corner, so all you can hear is the squelch of them stepping and the groan, but you can't see them.
Yeah. It's a game. I mean, the other dynamic as well within the Resident Evil games is how limited and scarce ammunition is. So you couldn't stand there and fire off 20 or 30 rounds and hope you hit it. You had to move forward, or you had to advance into the darkness.
Absolutely, yeah. You had no choice, and you can actually put yourself in a no-win situation if you do go around just blasting willy-nilly and wasting all of the ammunition.
It's all right.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
We do seem to be having some technical issues. I can hear like a disturbance on the line, and I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Disturbance.
Yeah, it's like a I don't know, like a graunching sound. I don't know where it's coming from.
I've got my heating on. My heating's quite old and inefficient. So is it?
I don't think it's that. No, I think it's something technical. It sounds like something on the line.
Right. Not much I can do, I'm afraid.
I don't know whether there's any like feedback coming through to anyone else.
It's alright at the moment. It was earlier, but I can hear quite clearly now.
Yeah, everything okay?
Yeah, it's fairly. Yeah, we're okay.
Okay. Yeah, everything seems to be all right here now.
Cool.
Let's see how it goes. Yeah, there seems to be some issues with Skype this evening for some reason.
Yeah, so with me then, I never actually played the original 3 Resident Evil games in their original format because I didn't have a PlayStation. I know they did put Resident Evil 2 on the N64, but because I'd never played the first one, I didn't see the point. But I was still kind of aware of it as part of the sort of zeitgeist at that time, because you started seeing images of it in like the magazines that Casey mentioned and that kind of thing. And something that I noticed is the first one I didn't. My first memory of it is the video game box, like we mentioned earlier. But then I was aware that okay, it's a zombies in a mansion sort of thing. But then by the time the second game in particular was out, and there was a lot of promotion for that in magazines and game shops.
I mean, the first one had been such a success, you know.
Yeah, of course. But now all the images I was seeing, it now seemed to have taken on like a Cronenberg style body horror thing, as opposed to just zombies.
That's absolutely it. That is,
and I mean that is in the game. It's absolutely there with William. What's his name? Birkin.
William Birkin, my favourite Resi monster of all time.
Well, this is the thing. I was just going to get to that. So I remember noticing that had changed, and that kind of piqued me interest a bit because zombies. I'm going to sound a bit hipster here, but I got fed up with zombies before everyone else did. So it was never something to draw me in. But then when I thought, oh, there's other monsters in it, that was a bit more of an appeal. So then when the GameCube came out, I got they did a remake of Resident Evil on that. And I remember speaking to Casey about that because they changed so much about it, and they were like rules that used to apply, like the zombies won't follow you through doors. That didn't happen anymore.
No, they will now.
All sorts of stuff. But yeah, that was my first playing introduction to it. I'd heard a lot about it, and I've spoken to
So
Casey
you played the remake first?
Yes, the remake, Resident Evil GameCube or Cube or whatever it was called.
Wow.
That was my first playing experience of Resident Evil.
So you had basically,
really good.
I mean, yeah, you had the superior experience. I mean, the original Resident Evil obviously is a classic, but it is very much a product of its time. You know, it is very much the case that you go back and watch it now. I mean, it's unplayable at this point because of the old-fashioned controls, the tank controls and whatnot. They just don't feel fluid anymore. And you have to bear in mind, you know, it's one of those early experiments in 3D. You know, this was
graphics never bother me. If I go back and play an old game and it's got awful graphics, I'm not bothered about that. I can put up with that. But it's like you said, the controls. The controls on things is what makes it unplayable.
Yeah,
it's like
those
Golden,
old
I tried to play that a few years ago, and it's just not doable now. You know.
Well, GoldenEye's a really good shout because it is very equivalent. GoldenEye, when it came out, changed the way people viewed first-person games. Full stop. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. Playing it now, no.
You can't do it now.
And Resident Evil is kind of the same. It's not as bad, but by God, does it hurt to play the original Resident Evil now? And you know, contextually at the time, it was amazing. It was absolutely incredible.
Well, what surprised me on the GameCube version is, firstly, there were bits in it that were not in the original one, which Casey pointed out when we spoke about it, like the whole thing.
You live in the
mansion. Yeah, it's bigger, but also, just because I hadn't played the original, I was surprised how many non-zombie things there were in it. I just thought it was going to be wall-to-wall zombies, but they were like the shark and the snake, and there's the tyrant, and there's the dogs, and the hunted gremlin-looking things, and I was not expecting all of that. So it was a pleasant. I think it was marketed as like very zombie-heavy, but I don't think that was ever the entirety of the thing, and I liked that because I get bored of any game when I'm shooting the same sort of enemy all the time. I like to have other stuff to fight, not just the same thing.
But it was largely just the zombies that featured, for the original game certainly, that featured in all the promotional material. It was marketed basically as Night of the Living Dead, the video game.
Yes.
Going back to that first conversation that I had with Lex, when you said I've got the benefit of experiencing this, it's coming back to me a little bit now, but that's what me and Lex were talking about in that first thing. I can't remember how we brought it up. I think Lex mentioned games. I literally had only played like 4 or 5 games at that point in my life. And he was saying that, as you just said, Lex, about there's a lot more to it. There's this huge mansion, and then he started talking about these parts of when you put them down and they get back up and chase after you. What do you do then? And I was like, it wasn't on the original. I can't.
It didn't happen, did it? In the original, yeah.
So it was like a Mandela effect thing. He's telling me things about this game, and I'm thinking that's you know, and this point we're talking like 2-3 years previously, playing it. So I was like, it's all wrong. So he said, well, come to mine and we'll go through it together.
Yeah.
So he asked me for some advice on one particular section that they'd clearly streamlined and made. And I was like, go through the door on the left. Oh, there is no door on the left at all. I've just got to carry on. There should be a door on the left. So our friendship came around that whole, let's figure this fucking game out if it kills us.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. So, like, Resi for you guys has this really particular resonance about it, yeah? Because it's what you bonded over.
And what inspired me to think, let's do this podcast now, and let's have Casey on it as well, is that very recently I've been playing the Resident Evil 2 remake on the Xbox One.
So good.
It's brilliant, isn't it? But so once again, Birkin looks amazing. But once again, I've been messaging Casey and saying, "What do you do on this bit?" Because I don't like to Google it. I'd like to try and figure it out, but I'd rather ask somebody and do it that way rather than rely on the internet. I'm a bit old school with stuff like that. So,
like, the Resi 2 remake is even more different from Resident Evil 2 than the Resi 1 remake was from Resi 1. They've changed the game quite dramatically.
Well, they have, because it's the entire camera angle and the way you navigate the environment is different now, isn't it?
It's completely different, but also
it's like Resident Evil 4. It's like they've tried to do it in the style of Resident Evil 4. I think. Yeah. I think that's the idea.
It's slightly more dynamic, isn't it? I mean, I know the engine they used was the one from Resi 7.
Okay.
Which is pretty. It's quite interesting because Resi 7 is a completely different game from the other Resident Evil games.
First person, isn't it? Was that the first person?
Yeah. It is first person, and also just the style of horror is completely different as well. You know how? I mean, the Resi games have always been the B movie horror, haven't they? You know, they've always been the funnier horror, the stuff that gives you jump scares, that it grosses you out. It's not like, say, Silent Hill, which is psychological horror. But Resi 7 changes it completely.
Yeah, I liked Resident Evil 7 a lot. I just don't think it needed to be a Resident Evil game. It could. I think they just kind of slapped that label on in a fashion as to make it, part of a franchise, because it didn't need to be Resident Evil at all.
Probably right. My guess is before it had the Resident Evil Biohazard label, it was something else.
So I was just going to say Cloverfield. Yeah, it's like the Cloverfield effect. This film's not going to sell very well. Say it's part of Cloverfield. Just call it that, and then it'll be fine.
Actually, I mean, it did work rather well, because what it did was reinvigorated the Resi franchise. I mean, you have to bear in mind, up until that point, Resident Evil had really gone into the sewer. It had gone into the toilet with Resi 5 and 6.
I actually enjoyed 5 and 6, but they are very much action games as opposed to...
They're not horror games.
No, it's an action horror game, but I did enjoy them. But yeah, they're not a patch on what Resident Evil's meant to be. But in terms of an action horror that you can play split screen co-op, I enjoyed them for that aspect.
Yeah. Absolutely, but the actual reputation of the franchise was really on the rocks at that point, because people really what people wanted was a horror game.
Yeah.
They wanted a proper frightening game again, and with Resi 7 they kind of got it. It is a very frightening game. I mean, it's one of the only video games I've ever played where I actually not wanted to progress at certain points.
Yeah, I always get them bits where you're like, oh, I don't actually want to open that door. Water-based bits, I know this gets Casey as well, but like where you've got to walk through a flooded basement or something like that.
There's always one. Always one flooded section.
Yep.
Yeah, I've not played much of a Resident Evil 7. Just going to skip back slightly. Is on the original trilogy, if you look at it, like we're going full Star Wars now, calling it the original trilogy. Those three were in a world, and between 3 and 4, computer games changed, and you got Resident Evil 4, which was much more dynamic, and the first third of that I thought was a brilliant horror film. Right. It was a perfect combination of action and horror, and it continued that theme that they'd started in 2 and developed in 3. When you have a big fight, have a rocket launch, have a Gatling gun, have all that. However, make it very tense and claustrophobic and atmospheric. 5, I felt this right at the beginning, like literally the first 5 minutes when you're walking through the crowd and you're going to go and see the execution happen. And thereon, they throw monsters again. So, 6 next me, but when I went back into 7, and I did it friends with the full helmet thing, I managed half an hour, and I got, like what you just said, Lex, I got that feeling of, well, A, I was in the helmet, so I was like, I'm going to be sick and fall over.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah, but B, I don't really want to continue playing this game, but I'm really enjoying it. And you get that, what's the word, juxtaposition of 2 really different things. I want to finish it blast, and at the same time, I'm really not keen on opening this door.
Well, with Resi 7, I've played it through, but I've been playing it with friends to show them what it's like. I wanted to show them like how different this experience is when you have the VR helmet on, and it does something to the lizard part of your brain. It excites real dread and real fright. Usually when I play a horror video game, anyway, there's a massive disconnect between me and what's happening on screen. Even when it is very atmospheric and very immersive and very terrifying, there's always that disconnect. The VR helmet takes that away somehow. Even when you consciously know it's just a virtual experience. So what I found was I could only play it for like 10, maybe 15 minutes at a time, because it was making me too tense. It was actually exciting all of these really unpleasant emotions and experiences and making me just too tense.
That's interesting, that it has a genuine effect on you physiologically and psychologically. I've not played VR, I must admit, because I've never been a fan of what I call gimmicky games. Like I mentioned, the Wii. I don't mind, family party, grandma's going to get up, all have a go on tennis for 10 minutes, fine. Yeah. But when it's a game like, oh, you hold this in this hand and you hold that and you've got to wear this helmet, I'm like, can I just sit on my chair with a fucking controller? Can I just do that? Do you know what I mean? I don't want to be having to jump up and down and you do this with your left arm and that with your right, and you've got this thing on your foot, and I'm like, just give me a controller. I'm not bothered about all of that.
I completely agree. I generally, gimmicks in video games, even if there's no peripheral that refers to it, if it's just within the video game itself, I'm not for it. I'm absolutely not for it. But Resi 7 it's another order of magnitude. It's designed to be played on the VR helmet, and when you do, it just does something. I can't even define what it is. It's like it tricks your brain. It's a video game. Obviously it's a video game. It's not real.
Actually, sorry, I was just we did. My one experience of VR is when I went to New York a couple of years ago. We did, in Madame Tussauds, they had a Ghostbusters exhibit set up.
Right.
And they had a whole warehouse room set up for VR where you like walk along gangplanks and then the floor shakes and then there's fans and marshmallows thrown at you. And you've got the headset on and they give you a proton pack and you're doing Ghostbusters stuff. And there is one bit where you were on the roof and slime was flying about, and then Stay Puft comes up, and you've got to walk along this narrow, like, gangplank in scaffolding between 2 skyscrapers. And all you are walking on, really, is a patch of floor that's raised up about 3 inches, so you can feel the edges of it, but you're only about 3 inches off the ground, and logically you know that, but your vision is telling you that you're really high up. Your earmuffs playing sounds like you're really high up, and there's massive fans in the wall blowing at you like you're high up. And genuinely, walking along that, I was reluctant to walk out on it, because my brain's like, you're really high up, and the other half of my brain's like, you're not, you idiot. But it was really difficult stepping out onto that plank.
Well, I can well believe it. I mean, the reason my friends make me play Resi 7 is because they can't. They find it just too much. I remember my friend Ray. He got curious at one point, and we were in a reasonably safe place in the house. When you get into the main area of the house, and it's a reasonably safe space. He said, "Can I just have a look? Can I just see what it's like?" So he got the helmet on. He looked around, took in the room, and then he just went, "Nope," and took it off. And was like, "No." I don't like that at all. That is terrifying.
I think with regard to the lizard brain idea that you mentioned, there's like three levels of excitement or involvement or immersement that I find in anything in comic books, films, games, what have you. And there's like the first one where you're enjoying it because you find it pleasant. There's the second one where you get that like adrenaline reaction. And you mentioned feeling tense like 15-20 minutes. I've had games like that. Certain parts of the first Dead Space game were like that for me.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, and various sections of some of the Walking Dead Telltale games have been like that. And like, after 15, you are just your body feels like you've just done a marathon.
Yeah, it's you get all of your joints ache. You feel you feel unwell. You actually feel slightly unwell, and I find that's what Resi 7 does when you're using the VR. And there's that very strange feeling of I don't want to go through the door.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't want to open the door because I am afraid.
Yeah, on computer games it's usually like, oh, there's no enemies around, I've done pretty much everything in this area and I'm getting galore. I'm going to fight a boss.
Yeah.
And Resident Evil 4 had little elements of that. Again, mostly in the first area where you're in that village.
Oh, that was so atmospheric.
Just before you hit the chainsaws, the screaming women with chainsaws.
Yeah.
Or when you're in the farmhouse.
Yes.
When Pièce de Resistance for a zombie, you defend the farmhouse. But the third bit is the total immersive. I can't deal with this. I can't separate it.
Sure.
And I got it with Resident Evil 7, literally in the loading screen area.
Jill,
You
don't want to go back
no one
there.
prepares you for the fact that is also going to be 3D animated. So
What
I'm
was
just
that?
watching a candle flicker and like I could put my hand behind the box that I used to store it in
Jill, go and investigate.
to save him, and I could
I'm going with her.
walk up to the table and put my hand underneath the table and not see.
Chris and I go
It-
back
it
a
just-
long way.
All right,
You can't
I'll secure this area.
fathom that until it's done. It's like
Stay sharp.
it's like the jump between Resident Evil 3 and 4. You can't imagine being able to look over the shoulder of the gun that you fire at, and then suddenly you can, and you never.
Right.
And then going backwards, you can't imagine doing that. Going back to that over again.
Of course, yeah. It is another order of magnitude, isn't it? It changes the zeitgeist completely. I mean, the VR helmet really is tailor-made. That whole experience is tailor-made for horror. I mean...
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah. I think it certainly suits that better than most other genres.
You get... Like, I'm not going to go too much into spoilers, and I didn't go too much into Resident Evil 7 to spoil it, but the first time you deal with a stressful combat situation, your character is stabbed through the hand, and you put your hand up to block it, and you see the knife come through. And I had a full 10-20 seconds once I took the thing off and been like just looking at my actual flesh hand thinking, I'm stabbed. Whereas at the time, I threw my hand up because it's just a reaction.
Yeah, you physically do it, don't you? You actually, and it's so strange. You almost feel the weight of the impacts as the character is throwing herself at you. Yeah. It's an amazing experience. I've never had anything quite like it. I mean, it's a particular kind of horror, and there are different kinds of horror in different kinds of video games that have affected me in different ways. Like the horror in Silent Hill, for example, is of a totally different kind. It's more psychological, it's more symbolic, so it has a slightly different, almost more intimate effect. But for immediate, like, threat to the self horror, I've never actually felt as though I was at threat like I have with Resident Evil 7.
No, I think if you think of most of the experiences for just watching it and enjoying it, the middle one where you get excited and adrenaline kicks in, and then the last totally immersive, as 3 grades on a gauge. And the most it got prior to that in Resident Evil 2 was probably up to the 6 or 7, probably like the higher end of the middle section. And I remember the first actual fear I had for a computer game, the first game you take the controller, I don't want to do it, was me and my nephew, who was only 5 years younger than me. So I'd been about 15, he'd have been about 10. Resident Evil 2, as you go into the police station, you take the left set of doors that are locked in a shelf, and that's where you first see the liquor, and all you can hear is the drip of the blood. And that's all you see, and all you hear is just blood dripping. And then you played it yourself, you go down that corridor, and the cinematic kicks in. that's when the liquor drops down from the ceiling, having decapitated a police officer, and attacks you for the first time. The music suddenly starts going. You're not really given a warning that this thing's going to attack you straight away. You just drop back into the gameplay, and it's the black bars at the top and bottom disappear, and that's it. You play the game.
Yeah.
And after the first time we played that, Aaron and I were throwing the controller at each other for a good being like, what else in this game apart from go down that one damn corridor?
Good idea.
I found myself developing a kind of, on Resident Evil 2, you get like this slight feeling of anxiety every time you start hearing Tyrant's footsteps.
Oh my god, yeah.
Because you're like, oh fuck, he's back again. It's sort of somewhere between exasperation and you're looking and you're like, I don't have enough ammunition for this. I don't, you know, he always turns up at the point where, because again, this is the remake, I don't know how the original worked because I never played it, but he can turn up anywhere and a locked door doesn't keep him out. I've had him literally smash through a wall before when I've like barricaded a door. He's just come through the wall. You know, there is no way to keep him out. If he's turning up at that point, that's where he's coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, Lex, that you haven't played the original, because, you know, in the original Resident Evil 2, what happened was the original Resi 2 came on 4 discs.
I may need it.
And what you had,
wow.
right, yeah, 4 discs, and you had the A and B scenarios for each of the two characters, Claire
Yes,
and
of
Leon.
course, yeah.
And the Tyrant, Mr. X as he was called back then, he only turned up in the B scenario for each character. He wasn't in the main scenario for each character. What they've done with the remake, they've taken both scenarios and melded them together.
Yeah, because I was going to ask Casey this actually, and then I thought I'd save it for the podcast. Does Birkin kill him in the original version?
No.
Because he does in this. You get in the lift with Claire and with the little girl, and the Tyrant rips the lift open and he's trying to get to the girl, and then Birkin appears behind him and just rips the Tyrant in half. And it's great, but I didn't know if that happened on the original or not.
The way the original was done, I'm just going to correct you slightly on what you said. It came on 2 discs, it was 4 scenarios.
That's it, 2 discs, 4 scenarios, that's it.
Is the initial car crash, the car either spins or it doesn't. George, have you played the remake?
Oh, I've done, yes, I've played the entirety of the remake.
So is that introduction the same, where they're fleeing and the tanker is behind them?
That's it, yep.
Right, cool. So Lex, that initial crash, when you put the first disc in, you're playing Leon in his first scenario, the car doesn't spin, so he gets out the right hand side and he heads to the gun shop. Claire's scenario A is she gets out of the left hand door of the car and she's at the back end of the police station.
Sure.
So, her part is meant to simultaneously alongside yours. Her Claire B is your Leon A. If you do it the opposite way around, if you do Claire first, the car spins and she gets out of the gun shop and Leon gets out the back of the police station. So for all of her A scenario, whichever character you've got for the A scenario, they're up against the story of what happened, why the virus got released, the whole thing with the Birkins and the Umbrella thing, the rats leaking the G-virus into the water system.
Yeah.
And therefore William Birkin becomes the agent throughout that, and you fight him at the end. He's the big enemy. If you are on the other side of the car when you're doing scenario B, you come up to the back end of the police station. Now, do you remember upstairs to the right of the police station there's a crashed helicopter?
Mm-hmm.
Lex?
Yeah, that's still there, yeah.
Well, you witnessed that crash, and that is... How is it brought on? Oh, it's a police officer that gets attacked by a zombie on the roof.
Yeah.
You witnessed that crash, so you witnessed events slightly differently. And just after that crash, they drop Mr. T, as I said, called him Mr. T. It's literally just in like a giant Coke can that hits the floor and splits open. And he's there like, okay, we need to wipe out this area, so we're going to...
Yeah, he's clean up, isn't it? He's like clean up operation.
Yeah.
That's basically it, yeah. He's the bioweapon they send in to basically kill any survivors.
Yeah.
He's the pre-Nemesis Nemesis.
Yeah.
I said that to Casey. I said, "Does he the way I'm familiar with Resident Evil 3 is pretty much the same principle as him, isn't it? That he keeps turning up and you can't properly put him down, but you can slow him down a bit." Yeah.
Well, in the B scenarios for the original Resident Evil 2, he wasn't an active agent like he is in the remake. Like in the remake, he can turn up anywhere.
Yeah,
he's not preset. He's actually wandering around the police station, and you have to use the soundscape to determine where he is. You have to listen to his tromping bootsteps. In the original Resident Evil 2, that's not the case. He can't turn up anywhere. He turns up at preset moments.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
When you, in a way, it added to the horror element of the original PlayStation 2 version, because that was all the pre-painted background. However, they'd do two versions of the pre-painted backgrounds. He'd burst through a wall, the room would fill with dust, you wouldn't see anything, and then the second pre-painted background with the giant hole in the wall would be there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but so on older games, you're used to this thing of look for the shiny thing that is slightly less animated than the rest of the background. That's something that you touch, it's a pickup or a door handle or a clue or something. The famous trope of like the beam of light shining on a villager in a pub in a Fables thing means you go and talk to that villager, he's got something to tell you.
Yeah.
So with Resident Evil 2, you just got used to this whole like, oh, there's a beautiful, highly textured fine art background, and then there's a really blocky green herb. I'm going to go for
Yeah.
So that element wasn't there anymore because you'd be expecting large areas of like matte, badly coloured animation sat on a wall thinking that wall's going to explode. It wouldn't happen at all. It would just suddenly pop, dust, bricks everywhere in the room, you stand up in the room, and they've changed the entire background because they knew that you would be looking for the pre-rendered area.
That's clever. I like working within the limitations, but still adding that element of surprise. I think that's a smart move.
Yeah, well, that was a good example of how they'd moved Resident Evil 2 on from Resi 1, because in Resi 1, really, they couldn't really do a great deal with the environments in that way, because of course it was still a bit of a tech exercise at that point.
Of course it was, yeah.
But Resi 2, they pushed to the nth degree. They really did. So you had characters like the Tyrant, for example, that could actually manipulate the environment to a certain degree.
Well, with regard to my experience of 2, I started with Leon and then I'm doing Claire, and it does follow the same pattern that Casey said, in that primarily Mr. X/Tyrant is the main enemy in Leon's story, but Birkin does pop in a fair bit as well, whereas in the second one with Claire, it is primarily Birkin, but the Tyrant pops up a few times until Birkin kills him. And there's just a few scenes like that. Like there's another one which I'll ask both of you. There's a section where you go in the sewers, and there's these kind of proto-Birkin things lurking in the water. Are they on the original one, or is it just it?
Sort of. What they've done in the original Resident Evil 2, those creatures, they're called Birkin spawn.
Yes.
And basically Birkin can lay embryos in human beings that swell into these big sort of Cronenberg body horror things. In the original Resident Evil 2, he only did it to one person. He did it to the chief of police. And that creature that bursts out of him is a boss. There's only one of them, and it's a boss. In the remake, what they've done is that they've made that boss creature a normal enemy.
Yeah, there's loads of them.
There's
and you're never quite sure if they're dead. You think they are, but then they mutate and get up again. So,
in fact, it's one of my favourite sequences. They just go full Cronenberg, don't they?
It's
full body horror.
I think the decision of the franchise to move slightly towards the body horror stuff, not even slightly, but for me, that makes it scarier, because I think put it this way, I would much rather have my head ripped off than a werewolf than get bitten by something that means I'm going to grow an eyeball out my face. You know,
right.
I would rather just die. I would rather just die than have that corruption of the body into something horrendous, but you're still alive, and I'd rather just get killed. So,
well, that's
you know,
it's something
that's
they go
just
heavy with. isn't it? In
Yeah,
Resi 2,
it is. Yeah.
with the notion of the G virus, which is slightly more mutative than the T virus is. I mean, the T virus essentially just creates zombies, yeah?
Yeah, it just reanimates something that should technically brain dead, but the body keeps going while it keeps rotting. That's essentially what it does. The G's are like it reminded me. I don't know if this dialogue is in the original. It probably is, but there's a whole section where you know where you find the diaries and you read information and all that. One of Birkin's diaries talks about it's designed for adaptability in weapons, like biological weapons. So if you hit it with a flamethrower, then it's going to grow armor, so it's fireproof. If you blow its arm off, it's going to grow an extra 2. If you're 10 feet away from it, it's going to grow an extra limb that's 10 foot long. That kind of thing. It reminded me of Doomsday in Superman, because that's basically what he's about. He's the Kryptonian version of that. Like, everything, if you kill him with fire, it'll come back fireproof. If you blow his arms off, he'll come back with armoured arms. If you blind him with light, he'll come back with no eyes and he can see with sonar instead. You know, that is essentially what he is about, and that's what it reminded me of when they were talking about the purpose of the G virus.
Yeah, the almost like evolutionary element of it. You know, in the original Resi 2, I don't think it even goes that deep into it. It's just designed to be a bioweapon, and that's it, you know?
It wasn't even that. Originally, you only find it in one file. It was meant to be a cure for cancer.
Right.
Okay. That does make sense.
The idea was introducing something biologically into the body, because the way cancer works is by taking over a cell and killing it off.
Uh-huh.
They wanted the original design was something like fighting fire with fire, something that when you mutate to something else, I'll mutate to something that'll deal with it.
Yeah. That works. I like that.
Yeah, I kind of like that too.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you if it's in 1 or 2. I want to lean towards 2 because I spent a lot more time on that game and took a lot more notes of it.
That sounds like a more Resi 2 idea, definitely.
That was William Birkin's original plan. I think Sherry, his daughter, I think she got cancer.
Right. Okay.
But then his wife. What's his wife called?
Oh, you encounter her, don't you? Quite
you
a
do.
lot, actually.
I can't remember if it tells you her first name. It might do. But
was it Anna? Something like that?
Birkin, something like that, yeah. You encounter her, and the reason she's so sad is because she raised it. She was part of this team, this scientist power couple that were creating the cure of cancer. And then he went down the road of, actually, we can sell this to the army, we can sell this to
we can make bioweapons out of this.
And ultimately, in no real spoilers, it's flashbacks and it's fairly obvious because you see him, but William ends up infecting himself after he gets shot, knowing full well that it's going to change him. But
yeah, I wonder if he has any idea of what it's going to change him into, though. I mean, Birkin was always my favourite of the monsters, even way back in the original Resident Evil 2, because he was, I mean, it looks very crude now, but if you go back and watch the segments with Birkin, the way the wireframe polygonal model mutates and changes in front of you, at the time on the PS1, that was really impressive.
It was groundbreaking. For me, because I'm trying to think of the name of the film, it reminded me so much of The Thing, in that whoever lines for these things had no concept of how a human should fit together.
Yeah.
And the famous one from The Thing where the guy's having a heart attack and then they go to do the paddles, the chest opens up as a jaw, the head falls off and turns upside down and becomes a spider. That just seems entirely wrong. Whereas I disagree with Lex's point about zombies, but like if you're alive, bitten by a zombie, you get back up, you still look like a human. Mm-hmm. The Thing had this element of body horror where by, like what Lex said, with developing a giant eyeball on the arm, you don't know what the final plan is, you don't know what the final outcome is, and you never actually see that with William Birkin. You see him as a slab of flesh, but what was he eventually meant to evolve into?
Yeah, what would be the final form? I mean, the last thing you see, if you certainly in the original and in the remake, is the big Shoggoth looking thing that he becomes at the end, which is just a mass of tendrils and a maw and eyeballs and whatnot.
I don't think there is a final destination, though. I don't think there is a final form because of how the virus works. I think it'd just constantly adapt and change, so it just to whatever was happening at the time. I mean, if you took 1 million people and injected injected them with that virus and put them through different hostilities. Some of them would have wings, some of them would have breather, some of them would have swimming underwater technique. You look like a big fish, or they would all be completely different. They wouldn't all just end up as a big spiky blob thing.
No,
it would depend on what they'd done.
Or where they were, or what situation they were in. Yeah. Right. And just what the virus did to them. There doesn't seem to be any pattern to it, does there?
Sorry, I was just gonna. I read an article about the series of Resident Evil, and this is slightly off track with 2, but with regards to, like we talked about, the elements of body horror that are introduced into 2, and 3 is more like a Terminator sort of horror, isn't it? Where you've just got this relentless Terminator in itself. James Cameron says that he was inspired by the original Westworld film, with that idea of this unrelenting humanoid thing just following you that you cannot stop. So that's a different sort of horror again. But I read, whereas Resident Evil 4 is the kind of almost like the Wicker Man sort of, you turn up in this village and everything's a bit weird.
Yep.
But what I read in this article, and I've never played this one at all, so I'm relying on you two for this. I read that Code Veronica is apparently the one where it starts going off track with regards to not being proper horror. As in, it's more like goofy Japanese, let's have a big fist fight with super strength sort of thing.
It's a bit mental, Code Veronica, I must admit. I mean, I stopped playing the original Resident Evil series around Resi 3. I didn't think it was a bad game at all. I was sort of moving away from survival horror at that point and more into the kind of horror that you got on PC games at the time. But sure. I did play a bit of Code Veronica, and what I got from it is it's not scary at all.
Yes, that's exactly.
That's what I read. Yeah, that is what I read in this article. That's kind of the line where most people would say, not necessarily jump the shark, but this is where it starts introducing those elements of let's have people with superpowers and that kind of thing. And,
there's very much that. You get like the resurrection of Albert Wesker from the first game. There's a lot of like delving into the background of where the mansion comes from, of where Umbrella comes from, the Spencer family that created it all and whatnot, and that's kind of interesting. But it doesn't have the horror element. It feels like it's the first of the Resi games I found that felt like a video game and nothing else.
It felt like superfluous fluff to me. It fitted in that they didn't consider it part of the original canon, which is why it got the they just said it was a side story, and it had that feeling of, if you take this is sacrosanct to me because I love the entire, without exception, I love the entire franchise. But if you look at like Terminator 3, that got panned a lot, primarily just because David Cameron wasn't a part of it. Mm-hmm. If you watch it and remove yourself from the idea that it's not Terminator, there's an enjoyable film there. And same for World War Z as well. Mm-hmm. You don't think this is what the original person had in mind. If you know that it's one part removed, it's okay. And that is how I felt with Resident Evil. I'm not going to try and butcher the names of everybody that worked on the original trilogy, but I don't think any of them were involved. I think they just signed off on it. If someone else who wasn't part, who didn't have that real in-depth feel of what Evil was just told, okay, you have these elements, you have collection, you have survival horror, you have puzzles, you need a male and a female, we get two different things, you need a human antagonist, and you need to change the environment. And they ticked all the boxes, but there's the details of it. It's like if Lex gave one of his... Actually, we've done this, because I did a Harkins story for him. If Lex gave one of his characters to me and just went, you go and write a book, I could... A great job, but it wouldn't have all the nuances. And the heart of Lex is
No, I agree. I think what they were trying to do with Code Veronica, I mean, from what I understand, Code Veronica, what eventually became Code Veronica, was supposed to be Resi 3. The reason Resident Evil 3 came out very, very, very soon after Resident Evil 2 is because it reuses a lot of the same assets. I mean, there are even a lot of the same areas in Resi 3. You know, you go through the police station again, for example, in Resi 3. It was supposed to be an add-on, that one, for Resi 2. but something happened whereby Code Veronica was put back massively, to the point whereby it came out on the next generation consoles, like the Dreamcast or whatever. And what the tech demo eventually became Resident Evil 3, and did very well. I mean, people liked Resident Evil 3. For a lot of people, it's their favourite game in the franchise. You know, the introduction of the Nemesis, of this active agent in the video game, and the element of choice that it introduced, where you can choose whether to fight him or to flee from him, and that changes the scenario.
Yeah, there's so much. But I'm gonna hands up agree with you on that one. It's between 2 and 3 for my favourite. Having said that, I'm saying that 4, the first third of 4 is perfect, beginning to end.
Yeah.
Up until so that is absolutely perfect in every way, shape, and form.
Resi 4 is a fantastic piece of work. I think it hits just the right balance for me between the sort of action-oriented direction that they were moving in and the horror elements as well.
I think it loses a bit of something when you start doing Indiana Jones traps and all of that stuff and laser grids, and you think guys in cloaks and stuff, and what is this now? It just kind of loses a bit of that initial setup that you get with the village, and like there's the amazing section with the lake monster, which is fantastic, and all that stuff. But all of that just feels a bit undone when you're shooting guys in robes in a temple. It doesn't feel like
I know exactly
anymore.
what you mean, and don't get me wrong, towards the end it completely jumps the shark. There's some mental stuff in that. For me, the moment where it really loses its verisimilitude and its resonance as a Resident Evil game is when you get the bloody Salazar statue chasing you.
Yes, that was. I'd blocked that from my mind. That part was so bad.
It was so silly, wasn't it? That moment is so... And don't get me wrong, there are certain elements of Resident Evil that are innately ridiculous, like the notion that for some reason Umbrella don't just use electronic locks and pass cards and whatnot. No, you've got to go and get this very particular jewel from the eye of this tiger to put into this...
They did... Do you know, when you just mentioned that, then it reminded me of something I thought of when I was playing the game. They did a sketch about something like that on one of the old Simon Pegg shows. Was it Big Train or something like that that they did, where it was a security firm. They didn't name themselves, but it was blatantly meant to be based on video games at that time. And it was like, so what security system are you thinking? And it was for like an office firm, and the guy Simon Pegg was the representative from this company, and he was like, well, we're thinking we'll have a system of locks based on playing card symbols, but the keys won't all be in this room. We're going to hide one in the attic, you put one in the basement, one of them's inside a chicken, you've got to kill that chicken to get it, and it was just explaining it like this, and that it just reminded me of that when I was playing Resident Evil 2 remake, because that is exactly the truth.
That is exactly it, isn't it? That's kind of like, it's an Umbrella motif, it's what they do, And at this point, you've just got to accept it, because it's so much part of what
it is. It absolutely is part of it, yeah. I think you kind of need it now. It's it'd be like taking the pipe systems out of the Mario games or something. Right. You need that in there now.
And I expect it. Quite frankly, when I'm playing a Resident Evil game, I expect to have strangely shaped keys that have got symbols on them that only unlock certain doors. I expect to have puzzles where I've got to put a jewel into some statue or something like that. It's part of the fun.
It's the more we talk about this, and because I've not thought about Resident Evil this in depth in years, and what you just said about the campness of all the keys and whatnot, I'm beginning to think that the whole diary section of the whole diary element of all Resident Evil games where you find written parts from all characters was actually just to explain stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Oh god, yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt. For the most part, those diaries, they're clues as to how to solve the puzzles, and they are just explanations as to why they exist. I mean, even in the Resident Evil 2 remake, I don't know whether you found it yet, Lex, but you find all these documents littered around the police station, and it's so tongue-in-cheek. It's just Capcom saying, yeah, we know, guys, alright, we know. This is a remake of an old video game, it's going to have silly moments in it.
Yeah, there's something like the captain sort of leaves you you a note like saying something like, "Oh, good luck trying to figure out how to get in your locker" or something like that, didn't they? Yeah.
And also, there are all these pamphlets around that explain that, oh, the police station is built around an old museum from Victoriana, and it was built by a man who was a little bit eccentric, and there are all these weird, odd things around the police station, and it's like, okay, fine.
They've changed that from the original.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I love that. It's bullshit. It really is, but I love it to bits.
I like that actually, because the point I was getting at is in Claire's scenario in number 2, it's the police chief that's brought all the art in.
Yes.
And there are a couple of really sketchily written, like, hey, we don't like this guy suddenly coming in and hanging paintings all around our police station. Seems very... From a gamer's point of view, you're like, oh, really? That just gives him an excuse to put a club key in a car. He says specifically in one of his diaries, the keys that the higher up umbrella people gave us, they gave them to safekeeping. So I scattered them throughout the police station.
Yeah. I've put them behind paintings and in secret alcoves. What?
What about you? It's convenient that it just so happens that your theme for your entire police station that you've just decorated with retro art is the decks of playing cards.
I'll take it.
B, it's really stupid for Umbrella to have trusted with this, because your idea of safekeeping in a police station is just scatter them willy-nilly.
It's like a kid. It's like a kid hiding, like a kid who's found an adult magazine, and they're like, "I'm going to hide it somewhere." And your version of hiding it is just move 2 books on your shelf and put it behind them, and your mum will never find it, even though it's 3 inches taller than the books you've put it behind. You know, it's that sort of logic, isn't it?
And it is. I mean, you know, you have to forgive like the original Resident Evil games, because again, they came out more or less at the turning point from 2D to 3D. You know, it was. There was still those sort of video game elements where video games weren't trying as hard to just be narrative experiences. They weren't trying as hard to create like a reality or a sense of verisimilitude. So yeah, you did have silly video game elements like take this key to unlock this door. But you know, I kind of like those elements. There is a charm to them.
I do like it. The only part where I find it jarring, and I haven't noticed this on Resident Evil 2, but like on Resident Evil 1, that mansion is falling apart.
Yeah.
And there are bits where you've got Chris Redfield is this big soldier, he's about 6 foot odd, built like a brick shit house. He comes across a door that looks like it'd fall off its hinges if you sneezed on it. And he says, "Oh, I can't get through this without finding this tiny little key." And I think, Chris, I could shoulder barge that door down. You've got 4 stone on me, mate. I'm pretty sure you can get that door down. You know, you could easily cover that up by saying that actually the mansion's doors are lined with steel and they just look like they're old because that's part of the illusion. They could cover that up with 1 line of dialogue in one of the diaries, but I never spotted anything like that, so it just kind of jars you a bit.
Right. I did like you said, it's slightly campy that they've got all these keys and issues and things, and for various reasons, I haven't had a console for a while, and to fill that gap, I went on YouTube watching playthroughs and whatnot. Particularly of games that I played when I was younger. I even watched for an hour. I watched a playthrough of GameCube Jurassic Park just so I could see.
Oh God!
And I was watching, and obviously, modern day games now you can put 60, 70, 80 hours into them. Back then, like Resident Evil 2, my fastest time to the entire game was 1 hour and 27 minutes. And I know that for a fact, so I was for the S rating. I did it with 0 saves, 1 hour 27 minutes. And that it. Anyway, whilst watching these playthroughs, a game that came very quickly in the aftermath of Resident Evil 2 was Dino Crisis, which were,
of course,
excellent games. I was bored to tears within an hour just of like car key it, it's open this. Have you got red car key? And you're like, this is bored. They had bespoke emerald encrusted keys. A police station covered in art, and I could tell which area I was. Whereas Dino Crisis 2 was just grey corridor, car key, grey corridor, car key, Raptor. And I love Raptors and I love the Dino Crisis games, but I saw with that benefit of hindsight, I could see that the campiness actually, you had a flavour of every area you were in.
Yes.
Oh, I
absolutely,
totally
yeah.
agree. I totally agree, especially in Resi 1, where you've got this ridiculously gothic mansion that is straight out of like a horror film. It is straight out of a horror film, isn't it? It is tailor-made. And there's this element of environmental storytelling that comes through that. I mean, there's atmosphere created just by being in the environments.
Yeah. Plus, you know where you are as well. Like, we've just talked about the police station and the club key, card key, heart key. You don't get a heart key when you're in the labs later on.
Yeah.
It goes to various people's key cards and finding these people and raiding their dead bodies. It changed the format entirely. Whereas that could very just as easily have been find the key for the weapons or find the key for But they've created there's one part of one of the games where you're adding parts to a mosaic. There's another part where you're lighting fires. They've put a little bit more thought into how you do every single lot, because they knew it was such a large part of that game that they had to keep you interested. And whichever team went into that crisis missed that note completely, because you don't know what you can block and what you can't. It's like an achievement when you get that heart key for your final unlocking part of the bell tower.
I also find it's easier to remember where the doors are with that. You know, I'm not going to remember where were all the blue keycard doors. I can't fucking remember, but I can remember where I saw that heart symbol on top of the door. You know, that was down that corridor. I remember that.
Yeah, it's very clearly marked, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's actually a very clever way of guiding you around the mansion, and because the mansion and the police station are so well designed, it does create this very sort of organic flow through, which works very, very well.
Yeah,
it does.
Heated is probably the word I'm looking for. You feel like it's an open world, but at the same time it's not. It's pushing you.
Yeah, it's very defined, it's very confined, and there is only one way of doing everything. You know, there is a particular path that you have to follow, but it leaves you feeling as though you are exploring, as though you are making a choice. So you do have this kind of adventure game element to them as well.
They carried that over into the others. Like, the excitement for Resident Evil 3 for me was off the charts. The first game I was ever going to get the day it came out.
Right.
I remember paying like an extra £2.99 and I got a walkthrough magazine, which was a glorious, like, glossy 72-page thing. And I think I got a poster from the wall. So it was from Game, it's from first day release pack anyway. And I like the familiar. I'll watch Fight Club and Terminator and Jurassic Park and Gattaca until I'm bored to tears, and then I'll watch them another 20 or 30 times. Going into something new, particularly like in the realm of modern day with Netflix, so many people have told me, watch House on Haunted Hill, you like horror, this is a great horror film.
Oh my god, yes.
Exactly, that response. I'm loath to start it. I will watch BoJack Horseman another 20 or 30 times before I start the whole other thing, because I want that familiarity. So when Resident Evil 3 came out, we're like, hey, guess what? Did you like 2? It's more of 2, except you get to play as a guy this time. Or except you get to play as a girl this time, and you get the entire city this time. And just exploring that same thing over and over again really appealed to me. And again, it was until I went through these walkthroughs a few years ago, and I'm like, hey, you don't actually explore the entire city all at once, unless you get right to the end of the city area and then voluntarily choose for no reason whatsoever to go back through the entire thing.
Right, yes, it's...
You clean each area off as you go through it, and occasionally you can, like, you start off in that warehouse with the shipping container that's open. You can go back there at some point, and you can talk to the guy who's become a zombie that you leave behind at the beginning. And if you kill him, you get some extra ammo. However, if you don't do that, you're not missing out on anything at all.
Yeah.
The game pushes you for like 2 or 3 areas at a time, 2 or 3 areas, just jumble around those, and keeps it linear whilst still having this feel of open air, anything can happen at any time.
Yeah, it was very clever, and of course the Nemesis encounters really helped with that, because unless you knew where they were, you didn't know when he was turning up.
Yeah, God, yes. And within the limits of... This is actually... it reminded me of the earlier where I was on about the liquor dropping down from the ceiling. The parts of Resident Evil 3 where he would follow you, they didn't have an animation. Well, they did, but they only used it once. But they didn't have an animation for him coming through the door. They couldn't figure that. So therefore, you had to move to the next camera angle where you couldn't see the door in order for him to appear. So you'd be chasing you. You'd hit a door. The door animation would go. You'd be in an area completely clear, as soon as you moved on and the camera progressed to the next thing where you couldn't see the door behind you, that's when you heard the smash, he's here. And that created this thing where I would be edging, just like flicking my PlayStation pad, millimetre by millimetre, knowing the exact result on the screen, like, right, from here on, I've got to go in a straight line, because if I don't, he's got me, and if he's got me, he's dead. I'm dead. Yeah. And that in itself added a whole tension to it. That went to that gauge we were on about earlier, that pointed right up to the top of that tension thing. Because as soon as you heard that door smash, you knew you had to leg it. But it wasn't like any other game where if you hit A faster, you could run faster. You just went at that same bloody speed and hoped you didn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting looking back on it now, because really that is part of the evolution of horror video gaming. I mean, back then, the notion of an active agent that was following you around and was actively stalking you was pretty much new. It hadn't really been done before in horror video gaming, and certainly not in a Resident Evil title. But a few years later, that kind of video game would absolutely dominate the independent horror scene.
Yeah, if you look at what we've got of late, we've got that One Night at Charlie's?
Freddy's.
Five Nights at Freddy's, yeah! Oh my god, that's a rabbit hole.
You've got Slenderman games.
Slender really is just that, isn't it? Like, refined down. That's all it is, an active agent chasing you around. Obviously, Resi 7, that has that element with the family who can wander around the mansion. They've introduced it into the remake of Resident Evil 2. So, you have the tyrant actively following you around the place, and I'd assume with the remake of Resi 3, which is absolutely imminent, it will be enhanced to the nth degree.
Yeah, just as one other example, again, this was a remake, a walkthrough that I watched and thought, I didn't notice that before, like you said, free agent, there's one section of Dead Space where they do it. You cannot kill the enemy, you can only freeze in time for a moment.
I remember that, yes, it's a pain in the backside, and it's so tense.
Yeah, I think it's for Science Labs. They're trying to bioengineer them.
Yeah, they bioengineer this one specimen, don't they? That is absolute. It's like it's immortal. It just regenerates its cells over and over and over again, no matter what you do to it. I remember that. And what do you do to it at the end? How do you get rid of it?
Blow it out into space as a homage to Alien.
Brilliant. I remember that. God, it's been so long since I played the Dead Space games, but it's interesting that you bring them up because they are very much more recent successors to Resident Evil. They are descendants of the original survival horror.
Definitely, it's Resident Evil in space. Even the basic enemies look alright looking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the tone is different. I mean, Resident Evil, certainly the first 3 Resi games, as frightening and as disturbing as they can be, there's always this sort of undercurrent of slightly B-movie humour as well.
I think the dialogue and the fact that it's just the voice acting at that time is just which so Japanese people in the studio kind of speak English, and that adds to that campy flavour, and you get that kind of slightly melodramatic, like you're watching an 80s soap opera sort of, like Leon. There's all of that kind of thing going on.
It's like, let's get the office temp to do the English dubs, yeah?
Yeah.
But it also, I mean, that element also makes them iconic. I mean,
yeah, it does. It absolutely does. Yeah.
People do remember the iconic lines from Resi 1 and 2, the originals. They really do. The Jill Sandwich line, the Master of Unlocking line. We all know them.
Yeah. They've become as much a part of it as the horror, for sure.
I am actually planning on getting the Resident Evil 3 one when it comes to remake, but I'm not paying 50 quid for it. I'm going to wait till it's a bit cheaper than that. But I will be getting it because I haven't played that one, and everything you're saying about it reminds me of Casey telling me about it originally, and I've always thought that sounds like one I'd really enjoy, and I love the design of Nemesis himself, and I think it's great. But I want to see how they do that in a sense where I can physically turn the camera around and see that he's behind me. That's going to be interesting. I think that's going to be, like, it loses that element like Casey mentioned about when you go off screen, that's when he's appear. But it's going to have that new element of the fact that he can literally kick the door down the second I go through it. So
yeah, right.
It's going to be quite interesting to see. But I'm not a big enough even well, at the moment I'm playing the Xbox more than I usually do because I can't leave the house. But I'm not a big enough solo gamer that I can justify to myself paying 50 quid for a new game. I tend to wait till the half that price, to be honest.
I'll be honest, Lex, I've played the demo and I friggin' love it, and I've got to get it. I loved the Resident Evil. I love the Resi 1 remake. I got that when it came out on the GameCube like a decade ago.
Yes, yeah.
And that to me was a revelation.
More than a decade ago.
Yeah, it's actually...
That was about 15, that was about 18 years ago.
No, stop it. A decade I can about handle. Like 18 years? No, it was a decade ago. Let's just leave it at that. And I loved it. I was amazed that they'd actually not only bettered the original, but they'd actually created a whole new experience. I thought the remake was like the ideal Resident Evil experience.
That's the correct way to do a remake of anything, for me, films included, where you think, right, this is what the filmmakers or game makers would have done originally if they could have done. That's the way to do a remake. A classic example of that, in my opinion, is Peter Jackson's King Kong. In that you think this is the film that it was always meant to be if they'd had the capabilities to do it. Whereas a remake that completely loses the point of it, it changes the tone, it turns something into a comedy when it was meant to be action or whatever. I don't like remakes like that. I just leave it alone. But if you're going to do a remake that says, right, this is what the original was made on a budget of 50 quid in 1942, we're going to make the film it would have always been if it had modern technology and modern budget. That is fine. And I think Resident Evil GameCube version is that. It is basically a cash injection to it, a modern technology at the time injection into it. This is what the game makers would have done if they could have.
Yeah, and with the benefit of hindsight, of course, what they've also done is bound the story of Resident Evil 1 much more closely to what came after.
Yes, because you know what's coming next, so you can set a few things up.
Exactly. So there are references in the remake to things like the Spencer family, which you don't even get mention of until Code Veronica in the original series.
Oh yeah, that just reminded me of Resident Evil 0. I forgot about that one.
Yeah, Resident Zero.
He's in it, isn't he? Spencer's the leech thing.
That's right. Yeah, Spencer is most certainly in it. He's also, I mean, two of the Spencers are in Code Veronica, if I remember correctly.
Oh, well, what other family members is there then?
Yeah, there's a couple of the Spencers knocking about. There's two of the children, basically, the heirs of the Spencer family, and they're both absolutely crazy.
Yeah. Spoilers there.
It's fine. Basically, I'm going to assume, ladies and gentlemen, that if you're listening to this, you've played the games, yeah?
Well, we've just established they've been out a lot longer than George would like to admit, so I think it's fair.
And that's the bloody remake. That's not even the original one. I don't even want to think about playing the original one for the first time when I was like 15. And I think my first experience of Resi actually was the director's cut.
What was the difference on that? I forgot that they had a director's cut.
The original Resident Evil was censored to the nth degree.
Ah, okay, right. Censorship stuff.
There was a lot of censorship in the original Resident Evil. Like the opening cutscene, which was very unusual for the time, and just generally, was live action. It actually had actors and things.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
okay.
It actually had, actors in sort of important parts.
Yeah, loosely censor the word. Did that come out during the... Did the original game come out during the era that Casey was talking about with all the censorship and everything?
It's very close to it. It was 1996 or 1998, I can't quite remember. But it was around that era, yes.
The era I was on about with banning and video games, that was when I was about 6 or 7, so you're looking about 93, 94.
So it was a bit later on, but still the sort of like the ripples of it was still around at the time. And the Western release of Resident Evil had no blood. Like, not in the opening cutscene anyway, you saw nothing. All the deaths were implied. It was massively censored. But then the strictures became a bit looser. So they released Resident Evil Director's Cut that had the blood back in it.
Is that the only difference, or is there like additional levels and stuff, content to it?
I don't think there's much in the way of additional content.
It was later
it was much like Grand Theft Auto, where they changed the blood to green, so the zombies that you were running over, and you didn't get the head pop cinematic when you gun up, just things like that. Really.
It's little bits and pieces like that. So in the director's cut, you could do this thing where if a zombie was like bearing down on you and you aimed the gun up, you could shoot them in such a way that the head burst.
Right.
There was like a spray of very pixelated blood.
That's the head pop cinematic I was referencing.
Yeah. Just little stuff like that. Nothing major, to be honest. But at the time, it was significant because Resident Evil Director's Cut is kind of how it was supposed to be released.
I see.
Yeah, that was one that went. It would have gone to the board, and then they just said, "I'll change all these things to get a license." I always felt that the remake of Resident Evil is how they wanted it, because it felt so much. I got this particular quote from 30 Seconds to Mars. My drummer's got it from somewhere else. Lex has got it from somewhere else. But you never finish a creative thing. You just give up on it and abandon it, and release it, and just say, "Right, next, I'm done with that thing. It's not finished." And some of the elements of the remake, when I played at Lex's, I just remember that line coming back to me a lot. Such as like putting a zombie down and then having to set it on find.
Oh yeah.
That felt so right and so satisfying to do, and you didn't have quite enough to do all of them, so you had to figure out where you weren't coming back and then just leave that zombie to.
Yeah. And that was brilliantly clever, I've got to say, and a bit of a shock, bit of a surprise when you first play the remake. The fact that, in the original Resi games, what you do is you clear the corridors, don't you? So you make certain areas safe so you can go through them again, and when they're safe, they're generally safe. That's it. You can walk through them as and how you want. That's just not the case in the remakes.
Incinerate them, and it also followed up this tradition that Resident Evil had of like tasting, you sample the box before you even deal with it. So therefore, in the remake, what I'm getting at in the remake is that you shot a zombie and it went down. In the original games, you shot them until they stopped moving and blood came out of them. That's when you knew they were dead.
Yeah.
If there was no blood, then there was chances that they were going to get back up.
They were going to chomp your ankle basically when you went by.
Or given long enough, they'd just stand up again.
Yeah.
You went and got a hip flask and covered them with petrol and lit them on fire, and if you did that, they didn't come back. However, if you left them, were they called like Crimson Bloods or something?
Oh, Crimson Heads, yeah.
Yeah. So they could suddenly run, they've got claws, they're much harder to put down. And
they are nasty pieces of work. I remember when I first saw one of them, it freaked me the hell out, because of course playing the remake, if you've played the original, you assume you know what's going on.
Yeah, and you, the first time it happened, you wiped it out, and then you made it very, very carefully, set fire to everything from then on. You knew you were going down into the crypt underground, and that is where this one thing that was going to unlock that final gate is. So you're like, okay, here we go. This is the enemy I'm going to fight. And as soon as you get in, it's a Crimson Head. Mm-hmm. The big thing on his neck, so you can't shoot him in the head to take him down like you could before. So, in all of the Resident Evil games, you'd have the thing of like, you saw a weevil disappear down a corridor, and then the next time you see it, it erupts out at someone and you're fighting it. You hear the roar of a giant crocodile, and then a bit later on you go up against that thing. With the remake, they'd carried on this idea of, let's just tease them with what they could be fighting and get them scared in advance. And then here it is.
Yeah, but it's slightly different. We're going to rejig it so that the people who think they know what's coming, we're going to make it slightly more interesting, slightly more surprising than that.
The thing with the little girl in the cabin in the woods, that was all new, wasn't it?
Oh, Lisa Trevor, yeah, Lisa Trevor is a totally new introduction to the remake, and she
with all the faces stuck on her rags, yeah.
And she is, she's many people's favourite Resident Evil monster.
It's a good design. She's got like tentacly things that come out of her, hasn't she?
She is absolutely amazing, Lisa Trevor. She is a beautiful creature. And that element of tragedy that's around her as well, the fact that she is the first, she's essentially the first incumbent of the T-virus, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's the original person that they experimented on, and it's given her this particular immortality whereby she can't actually die, but it's mutated her into this mass of tentacles. And
you never see what she looks like under the rags either, and I think that's a good. I always like that kind of thing where what you can see is already horrendous, but the fact that you're not allowed to see underneath it, I think that's even better, because whenever you do see it, it's just got to be another mashed up face, so not letting you see it is better.
Yeah.
It's very clever.
Well, what she is, I think she's a bit of a hindsight. Rather, the point I was making about burning the zombies is they finish the first game and then after like 5 years, like, oh crap, we should have put that in. That's a great element. Lisa Trevor's for me was the opposite way. That is like, we've done 2 or 3 in the future. Let's go and include something from what we have now in what was. And I reckon Lisa Trevor's is the mother to the Nemesis.
Now that wouldn't surprise me. It would make a lot of sense.
Because I found a game,
What's going on
one of the spin-off games, it was the first shoot-'em-up, and I had to buy a friggin' G-Com gun to go with it. So it really, really wasn't worth it. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a Resident Evil shoot-'em-up, and basically...
I remember the one you mean, I can't remember what it's called off the top. Survivor?
Could be, something like that.
Something like that?
There's more files in that, and the whole point of that game is you start in a town with a gun and you've got amnesia, and you keep getting radio calls from someone saying, come and find me, I'm at this place, and you're just blindly wandering through. So you find diary extracts much like the rest of the Resident Evil films, and they talk about what happened in Raccoon City, and they talk about the Nemesis briefly, and it's the first time in the Resident Evil canon where they empirically call it like the operator that it's sent in to clean up. You never really explain.
Right.
But another thing they do later on is they point out, in one of the other notes, is they explain where the Nemesis came from. And it was someone that was infected with the G virus that was then given the T virus.
Oh.
So it's taking an infected person and infecting them further, and then that creates the Nemesis. The Nemesis, it's constantly changing, constantly pursuing, cannot be killed. Releases tentacles, can hold a modicum of human language.
Yep.
It keeps on saying stars. Lisa keeps on saying mother.
Yeah.
And they've never specifically said it. This is just my headcanon, but she must be the generation 1 of the Nemesis, if the Nemesis that we see in the game is the generation 50.
Yeah, that makes an enormous amount of sense, and I'm surprised that there isn't something in the games that actually points that. I don't know. Maybe they'll do it in the remake in Resi 3.
If not, they've missed a trick. That is literally just headcanon. But everything apart from me saying that those two are linked is true, and it's in.
There's only one Nemesis, isn't there? Because like the Tyrants, there's loads of them, but there's only one Nemesis.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I don't think there's like a batch of Nemesis.
No, I think it was a one-off thing, wasn't it? Like a one-shot weapon sort of thing.
Experiment. Yeah, that seems to be the case for a lot of the G virus creatures.
Yeah, they insinuate they say straight out in 2 that it's just the G virus mutating that occasionally makes something really, really big, which is why you get an alligator that's massive.
Yeah.
The T virus is much more controllable, which is why all the Tyrants look the same and can be dropped in and can be commanded.
Then they've got common elements, like they've all got the claws, for example. They've all got the exposed heart and all of that kind of thing.
There's no mutation there, whereas the Nemesis, where is it? They say it in the film at the start, at the end of the first film going into the second one. But they also say it in the game somewhere where basically the Nemesis is something they made and created and it's there, and they're just like, what do we do with it?
What do we do with it? Yeah, what's the use of this?
I don't know. And then, because, as I said earlier, in Resident Evil 2, in Claire's scenario where they drop Tyrant in, they've clearly got something in place to just go in and clear it all up.
Yeah.
So if you think about it in terms of that, the Nemesis is surplus to requirements, but it's really unstable and they're not really sure if you can control it. So
of course.
I believe it's the mercenaries that are part of the storyline in Resident Evil 3 the one that's clearly evil that ends up being evil. At the point he says, "Give me control of it, unleash the Nemesis," or something along those lines, and he's typing into a computer. And then they use that idea in the film, in the Resident Evil 2 film, where they show like Nemesis vision, for lack of better words, and it's like a heads-up display that you would have for a sniper rifle or something in a computer game. So the Nemesis itself is partially controlled by a human being, by human optics.
Right. Okay. So it is actually like a satellite agent. It's controlled.
Yeah, it's much like if you get a follow-on character in something like Fallout, where you give it very basic commands and shoot at anything that's shooting at us, follow me, stay here, that sort of thing. That's generally how the Nemesis is seen to be.
Interesting. I mean, have you actually seen the redesign of Nemesis for the remake?
No, I've not. I love the original Nemesis. I'm just going to Google it now. Let's have a look.
It's very faithful, but they've just made it a little bit more sort of up to date, I suppose. It works very well.
Let's have a nose.
He looks a bit more like he's in pain.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stretched out skin is there.
It's unpleasant, isn't it? He looks agonised.
He looks a bit more Hellraiser.
Yeah, that was my thought as well. That was absolutely my thought. He looks a little bit Cenobitic, doesn't he?
Yeah. Whereas he was just sort of like mad and pissed off, and he had one scar going across his eye.
That's it. Yeah, he had like the line of stitches, didn't he, or something like that?
When his eyes are just bolted shut. But that's an indicator that he was just sort of like the hodgepodge creation of what we had left in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if we give one of these zombies the virus?
Of course, and he gets worse as the game goes on, doesn't he? He mutates massively. Apparently in the remake, what happens is, if you choose to fight him, then he changes quicker.
That makes sense.
Which is really cool. And also, he that sort of like the black get-up that he's got on becomes shredded and burnt and falls off of him a lot.
That's good, really yeah. Cool. You want to see that, yeah.
Happened in the original.
It's so cool.
And it's very... I always liked fighting the Nemesis because you did actually get a feeling that you'd killed him at some points.
Yeah.
There were whole fake happy endings in Nemesis. I reckon they'll recreate it quite faithfully, but you'll know it when it happens. There's a beautiful, doves flying, soft music, harsh light ending about halfway through the game. And when you first take down a Nemesis, you just drop him and you think he's going to come back. And in the later battles, you're actually taking chunks out of him. You're setting fire to him. His coat burns off. You blow a large chunk of his chest open at one point, if I remember correctly. And he doesn't come back for a while. The next time you see him, his coat is now basically a leather skirt, and the tentacles are much more prevalent. The final version, when you get down, it becomes like a dog version, like a bulldog.
I remember he sort of goes down on all fours, doesn't he? And he sprouts like teeth and all sorts of protrusions and whatnot.
It becomes much more like Birkin. So,
yeah, a bit like the form of Birkin that you fight towards the end of Resi 2.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go into the actual ending of the game proper, but he just keeps on going. But when you feel that you've killed him, I genuinely felt at some points like I killed him and put him down.
And you haven't.
No, and you haven't. Whereas with Birkin, it was always like, right, he's a big pulsating blob of glue, and that big pulsating blob of glue that's not trying to kill me.
But yeah, I mean, what I love about the remakes in particular, that Resi 2 was a surprise last year. I mean, we knew it was coming, we knew they were doing it, but I don't think what people expected is for it to be as just rawly brilliant as it actually was.
No, I bought it because I saw it and thought, I never played Resident Evil 2, I fancy that, but I wasn't paying that much for it. But then I saw it a couple of weeks back for, I think it was $15.99, so I thought, I'll have that. And I was just thinking, if it's alright for 15 quid, I'm happy, but as I've been saying, it's brilliant. It's good.
Actually a stunning game, isn't it? They've done exactly what they did with the original remake. They have taken the essence and the soul of the original game, but they've made it what they wanted it to be. So,
because it's got all those elements like never having enough ammunition.
Yeah.
that's back. You know,
Oh my god! In fact, in the remake of Resi 2, the lack of ammunition is it's a real source of tension. You've got to learn how the zombies work in this game, because if you don't, if you try to take down every zombie, you are going to die.
Well, it's that thing of, right, I can hear tyrant's footsteps, I've got an empty handgun, I've got 75 bullets for a gun that I don't even own yet, and I've got a couple of flash grenades.
Yeah.
You think, right, I'm going to have to run this one.
Yeah, you've got to learn how to dodge the zombies, but also to incapacitate them. So there are areas where you can lead them so they fall over banisters.
Yes.
And they plummet down, and so you can get round them that way. It's really clever. And also, have you noticed the way they've just slightly rejigged the zombies so they're scary again? You can't put the bastards down.
No, unless their heads explode. Yeah. It's never like when you've got the big magnum, then you can just proper blast their head open. It's never 100% guaranteed that they're dead. It's very difficult to tell, yeah. Some of them are, but then some of them aren't. But it seems completely random, and I like that element of it.
I like that too, and also
it's like you've put them down, but the virus is still working. Yeah. So maybe it'll reanimate them, maybe it won't. You don't know. You
just don't know. So you'll actually go through a corridor that you think you've cleared, and you haven't. They're up again. And what I really love is, because obviously the game is way more advanced, whatever damage you've done to the zombies physically remains. So you can shoot their jaws off, you can shoot bits of their arms, you can shoot bits of their chest, and it remains on each of the individual models.
And they come through doors now.
Oh, they do, yeah.
Unless it's like a sealed door that you've locked or something. But if it's just a door that you've just closed behind you, they're going to follow you through.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're slightly more... I wouldn't say intelligent, but they're slightly more persistent than they used to.
They'll just like bang on the door, and the door will swing open, and they'll fall forwards on the floor, and then pick themselves up. It's quite a realistic. It's not like they're turning the doorknob, you know. It's quite a realistic way of doing it. But I like that persistency. But again, I feel like the original games would absolutely have had that had they had the technical capability to do it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. But can you imagine trying to do stuff like that on the PS1?
Something I'd forgotten about, because again I've only ever seen videos of the original games. I didn't play them. But Casey mentioned about the door opening animation. I forgot about that.
Oh yeah, I loved that.
Yeah, so you couldn't see what was coming up at all. It just dropped you in.
Yeah, see the animation of the doors opening, and then boom, you're in the next room. And I forgot that. I completely forgot that element of it.
I mean, obviously, that was again a product of the limitations of the system, because they were basically loading screens, yeah?
Yes, essentially, yeah, that's what they were, yeah.
At the same time, they also created this incredible sense of atmosphere. You had this sort of like black space with the door in front of you. And as it opened, you had that sense of building tension. That I really liked that. Of course, that isn't in the remakes, obviously, which is kind of a shame. But it's something I really liked about the original games.
This is a question then. What do you think? Because what made that scary is that you don't know what's going to be in that room then, because you can't. You know, like in real life, you open a door, you can see in the room before you step inside. But this is like the equivalent of being blindfolded, kicked in a room, and then your blindfold comes off. Yeah. So you've got no idea. So what do you think, across the whole franchise, for you personally, is the most terrifying monster? Like if you were to encounter it personally?
God, that's a question. That's a really good question, actually. You know what? For me, the scariest thing would be the spiders.
Yeah.
It would be the giant spiders, simply because I'm afraid of spiders anyway.
Fair dues, yeah. I actually really like spiders. I always pick them up when I find them in my house. But that's just me being a bit odd.
Annoying enemy, because they could climb on the walls, and when the animation started of them going from the floor to the wall, they became briefly invulnerable. So you almost always wasted a shot as they started to climb. They sprayed poison on you, so you had to find a blue herb, otherwise you were constantly running out. And then often when you shot them, they popped and hundreds of little spiders came out.
Hundreds, yeah. The way in the remake of Resi 1, the spiders are terrifying.
Yeah.
They are vile.
That's a quick question about the blue thing, though. Just very quick diversion. On Resident Evil 2, I'm constantly finding blue herbs, and yet I've yet to be poisoned. What is it that actually poisons you in Resident Evil 2? Because I've not come across it, or it's not doing it to me.
The Birkin spawn can poison you.
I must have kept enough of a distance that it's not happened then, because I've never actually needed it yet.
It's one of the grossest animations in any Resident game. If you get close to the Birkin spawn, they pick you up, they grab you with their sort of claw and hold you up, and you know that sort of sucker mouth that they've got?
Yeah. They've got that lamprey thing, haven't they?
It elongates, opens, and they vomit worms on you.
Oh, lovely.
And that poisons you, so you need to use your blue herb then.
Right, so for this question, do you mean as a gamer or as someone that personally...
No, as you. Like, what would you... If I were to say to you, I'm going to put you in an empty building and somewhere in it is one of the things that you encounter in Resident Evil, what would you find the most terrifying? And it can be any kind of fear, because obviously, the tyrant's scary because it can bash your head open, but it's still just a big bold bloke in a leather coat. It's not scary the way that a big spider is scary, is it?
Yeah, it's different, isn't it?
Like, my answer would be one of two things, and I suspect one of them might be the same as Casey's answer. One of them is, like we just said before, with Birkin, anything infectious, where it's not just the threat of killing me, it's the fact that it might infect me with something that means even if I kill this thing, I've now got this thing inside of me.
Yeah.
That's one fear. The other is the sharks or the lake monster, because I don't like... I mean, I'm not afraid of open water. I've swam out to sea. I'm all right with all of that. But I don't like the idea of encountering a predatory animal in the water, because I don't feel as if I could defend myself at all. Because in the water, we are fucking useless as a species. On land, even against a lion, I could have a go. I could kick it in the throat. I could poke its eyes out with my thumbs. I could desperately try and fight back. I wouldn't win, but I could have a go at it. But if I'm in the sea and a shark comes, I'm fucked. There is nothing I can do about that. You can't fight underwater. There's nothing you can do. So anything where, like, you're on a game and you come into a water section and then you see something move in the water, I hate that. It's just
the
flooded basement in Resi 1 is really the worst section for you, yeah?
Yeah, that's the one that jumped to mind for me. Lex has already stood on my toes with this one, but yeah, definitely the lake monster.
Oh, that is brilliant, that sequence.
What is it? Is it a salamander or something?
Salamander. And it's made worse, again, with this foreshadowing thing that Resident Evil keeps doing, is if you go left, you can go right up to the top of the hill. When you get into that, basically, it's a big C-shaped mud thing. You're about halfway down the sea, and if you take a right to the bottom of the sea shape, that's where the dock is. If you go up to the top of the sea and back on yourself, you enter a cinematic where you can pull out your binoculars and look into the lake, and you can see the villagers. Like in Resident Evil 4, it's like a cultist village.
Yeah.
Something going on. They're in a dinghy in the middle of the lake, tossing bodies into the lake, and something is coming up and eating them.
Yeah, and it's huge.
Yeah, and your map is going, where you want to be is the opposite side of that lake. And
another thing I found really disturbing. They're called the Venados, aren't they, in Resi 4? The villagers are infected with the parasites. There's the parasites change throughout the game. So when you first encounter the parasites and they burst out of the villagers' heads, they're like globules of flesh and eyes. They're kind of Lovecraftian.
No reason for us to stay.
Yeah.
But later on, when you get into the castle and you encounter the cultists, when you shoot their heads, the parasites that come out of them are these scrabbly, spidery-like, facehugger-like things.
That way
we even detach, can't they, and become enemies on their own?
Yes, they actually crawl out and become their own enemies. Those are vile.
Yeah, they it's the lizard brain feeling thing that we were on about earlier. Is they just create a sense of this thing isn't right and you should stay away from it.
It's wrong, isn't it? It's the way they scrabble around as well. They make a horrible noise. They make a vile noise. And it's the motion of them. The way all those legs scrabble and... it's repulsive.
so fast and the human body below them is so slow. And actually, they do that trick twice to another effect. There's an enemy later on that's covered in spikes, and it walks really slowly, and its head twitches continuously. And if it gets you within range, it just pulls you towards it and impales you on all these spikes that pop out there. But it's very, very tough and very, very slow. There's only about 4 of them in the entire game.
Are those the ones that you have to use a very special sniper rifle to kill?
You do use... you have to shoot from afar. I can't remember...
Because there's a segment with these enemies, I think it's the same enemy, they're called the Regeneradors, and they are these very slow moving, it's actually one of the most sincere horror areas of Resident Evil 4.
They are... Sorry, carry on.
No, go on.
I'm just trying to differentiate the two, because there's 2 enemies that do this thing very similar. There's these very slow moving twitchy ones that have got spikes, and there's another slightly actiony version of it, which is in the castle, to find prisoners.
Yeah, I remember the sequence very well, because there is the sequence where you find like a laboratory, which is a bit more like a classic Resident Evil laboratory, where these things are being cultivated, and they don't just have one parasite in them, they have multiple parasites, and to actually put them down, you need to use this special sniper rifle that shows you the locations of the parasites in their bodies, and you need to shoot the individual parasites.
I'd completely forgotten about that, Chris. You don't find that either, just to be bastards. They don't give you that option until later in the game. When you initially see them, you just have to until they fall apart.
You've got to run, don't you?
You can black them. It takes so much ammo that it's not a good idea.
It's just not worth it, yeah.
Then later on they say, here, use this heat vision rifle that the things glow hot so you can see them.
Yeah, those are pretty scary. I've got to say, those are pretty scary things.
I completely forgot about that. There is one other part, though, with a very similar enemy, and they call him the prisoner. And they repeat it about 3 or 4 times. Where he's blind, and he has huge blades on his hand. And if you make a noise like a gunshot, or if you run, he'll run for you and just start flailing.
Right.
You have to... there are bells on the walls, you have to shoot the bells. And his only weak spot is the parasite is coming out the back of his neck. So they distract them with bells, so they head towards a bell, run around them, and then shoot the parasite in the back of the neck.
I remember that. God, I haven't played Resi 4 for such a long time, but yes, I remember that now that you mention it.
Yeah, but both of those go against feeling. You want to run away, you want to unleash hell at them, you want to empty your rifle into them, but the actual way to survive is to stand still and pay attention and not make any noise and not fire a gun.
Yeah.
Doesn't the lake monster have one in its mouth?
Yes, it does.
I thought it did, yeah.
Oh, right.
It does have one.
It opens its mouth when it comes at you, and you can see the spidery thing in its throat, like where its tonsil should be.
Oh God, it's been such a long time. Honestly, I think the last time I played it was actually on the GameCube, so that was a long while ago.
There's a little movement actually in that animation that you just remind me of, Lex. When the monster, its first attack is it just charges at you, and Leon looks around and he sees these harpoons in the bottom, as you do, just harpoons in the bottom of your dinghy. It's throwing at it. So you have to wait for it to get within range and throw it at the wiggly thing in its mouth. You can't let it get too close, obviously, to sort of kill it. But when the animation stops and you go into gameplay, Leon immediately does this like panicked left, right, what the hell have I got? And holds his palms up to the sky. And it's just frustration of like, how the hell do I defeat this thing? I remember the first time I played the game and saw him do that, I was like, that's you and me both, buddy. What the fuck?
Yeah, right. What do you do?
Would that monster be your thing then, Casey? The lake one? Would that be your... Yeah.
Can't outrun it. It's worse because it's in a big open middle of the day thing. You could scream.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's not even at night or anything. It's right there.
Yeah.
Your idea that you gave us of you're trapped in a house, it's like house, many rooms, plenty of places. I can go upstairs if it's downstairs, etc. I could climb out the window. None of that. It presents more problems than fear. Whereas put me in a boat where I can't swim, I can't go anywhere. This thing's in the water and it can eat me in one go. It's Jonah in the whale. There's literally nothing I can really do bar pick up these oh, what weapons have I got? I've got harpoons. I've basically got toothpicks for this thing.
Yeah.
They've not given me much to go on here. And then it has, like, when you give it enough damage with the harpoons, it sinks under the water, and the rope wraps around Leon's leg. So immediately you've gone from, I'm in danger, or I'm safe, or I'm in danger again. Button mash. Get his thing.
Did you see the news article about... Oh, this was about 2 years ago, but it was great. I probably told Casey about it because it's the sort of thing I like to shit him up with. But there's one of the many lakes in America where there's got stories about a lake monster.
Right.
There was a diver doing an excavation there, not because of a lake monster, because of, there's other stuff there that is of scientific interest.
Yeah.
And when he got to the very bottom of the lake, very murky, he found a shed load of cow bones.
Oh, wow.
And as it turned out, there'd been a flash flood a couple of weeks earlier that had swept a load of cows into the lake, drowned them, and they'd just been eaten by all the fish, basically.
Yeah.
But for that split second, when you are in that lake, deep underwater, and you've heard stories about a monster in this lake, and you find a load of cow bones, how quickly would you want to get out of that water?
Well, that is like a horror story sequence, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd be like, get the fuck out of this lake.
Right. That is terrifying.
Your rational mind would just abandon you at that moment. The fact that this is the real world and we don't actually have lake monsters, that would escape you completely at that point. You'd just be out of that water.
Brilliant. But actually, I mean, the question's a really good one, Lex. Like, what would you find scary? Like, if you encountered it, because what I like to do with a lot of my friends is we sort of gather around and I play video games for them. We actually sort of react collectively. And one of the things they always say to me when we're playing horror games is what makes them scary is they ask themselves the question, what would I do in that situation?
Yeah.
And I found that the original Resident Evil was one of the very first games that presented an environment where you could ask that question. Because as hokey as it was and as B-movie as it was, the environment feels real, doesn't it? It feels like a real mansion.
The characters are as well. None of the characters have got, until later on when you start given a rocket launcher or whatever, to start with, you've got fairly realistic equipment. You've got an handgun and a knife. You're not turning up with a samurai sword, and again, this is stuff that happens later on in the game. And
sadly so.
You get a lot of stuff with Ada Wong becomes that person who, because she's an Asian woman with sunglasses and a thigh holster, she can take on 7,000 zombies with her bare hands. You get some of that shit, but until that starts getting added in, you are a fairly realistic character in this world, you don't have superhuman strength, and you can't, punch through the wall with your bare hand or anything. So it is very comparative to usual video games. You can put yourself in those shoes because what they're capable of is not vastly removed from what you'd be capable of.
But I think it's where the horror genuinely comes from. I really do. Especially when you're a bit younger and you're exposed to these things. When your imagination is so fervent. Like if you're still a kid or a teenager, you do find yourself sort of projecting yourself into the scenario, into the environment, and thinking, what would I do?
That's why Silent Hill's worse for me than Resident Evil, because Resident Evil, apart from the body horror element, which we've spoke about, it does take place in a somewhat rational world for the most part, whereas Silent Hill doesn't. Like Resident Evil, let's talk about Resident Evil 1, if I could get out of that mansion and run away from the dogs, I'm fine. Whereas Silent Hill, you can't leave if it don't want you to leave.
No, because it's happening inside your head, so...
But no, I mean, the town physically won't let you leave. It's that thing like the Mountains of Madness film. You get to the end of the road and then you're at the start of the road again. You can't leave Silent Hill unless the town decides to let you. And what happens there... doesn't have to make any sense, and it's that complete lack of the rational makes it very difficult to answer a question of what would you do, because you're now operating in a world where it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter anyway, because of course it's a psychosomatic environment. The town responds and shifts and changes to whatever you do. So
yes.
whatever the case, you're screwed.
Indeed. But you can't haul up away from it.
Yeah, it's terrifying actually. I mean, Resident Evil was like the beginning of survival horror, and really, in any real sense, it wasn't the first horror video game by any stretch or measure, but it was the video game that made horror a viable genre in video games.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast as well the other day. There's an American band called Ice Nine Kills. They're sort of a concept band, but the lead singer is the only person that's actually in the band. Everyone else is his friends. And he writes songs. I was really drawn to him because I did this with Alexis Stories when I first started writing my own music. He writes songs about horror films.
Right, okay.
Like, I'm paraphrasing, but like, for example, there would be one called Sweet Dreams, and that's about Freddy. What's the point I was getting? I've completely lost my train of thought.
How's it gone?
Right, what was I on about? I do this all.
Silent Hill. We were talking about that with Silent Hill, and then like the original like horror games.
Well, I mean, Resident Evil was the first really significant horror game in the West, to be honest. It wasn't the very first horror game, but it was the first significant one. But Silent Hill represents the evolution of horror.
I don't think you could have landed with Silent Hill. I think it would have been too much. I think Resident Evil was the entry point.
Can you imagine the furor that would have erupted if Silent Hill was the first horror video game on the PlayStation? I think what would have happened, it would have buried horror. The reaction to it, from like the moralists and certainly the right-wing press at that time, would have just buried horror in video games.
I have 2 points about this. One, I've just remembered what I was trying to say. Two, briefly, is when you're about the right-wing press attacking Silent Hill when it came out. That did actually happen. The demo for Silent Hill was the school section.
Oh, yes.
It was just after the Columbine massacre, and you were shooting child-sized demons in the head in the school. So the demo got pulled from the front of like PlayStation magazine and whatnot.
I can imagine. And in fact, certainly in the UK, that entire section was censored. So yes. It occurred, but they replaced the childlike creatures that you shoot with like shadowy things.
Yeah, they were just sort of like Casper style.
Yeah.
They were very, very different. I was very, very disappointed. The point I was making is the reason why Resident Evil was the first survival horror, because they were developed in America. Silent Hill isn't considered the start of the survival horror one. No, I'm going to tell like other way around. Survival horror considered the first survival horror. Resident Evil, even though it's a proper survival horror, isn't. The reason being that Resident Evil was released in America and it was all set in mansions. And this guy, the reason why it reminded me is this guy's a big horror fan. I saw lots about how he started writing music, and how I started writing music, and he talked about the thing I mentioned earlier, Resident Evil being a computer game for someone that didn't have any friends. You could play it. And he got into it because he liked old horror films, like 1910, 1920s Boris Karloff, that had this European image of horror, of big mansions and houses. You think about Dracula's castle.
So Gothic, the Gothic tradition.
Gothic, but also the idea that there were houses that were 300 or 400 or 500, 600 years old, and rich old people lived in them and did whatever the hell mad rich old people did.
Yeah.
America doesn't have that. America's quite a new country.
Of course, of course.
Resident Evil landed and didn't make that much of an impression because they got no concept of like a country house. Resident Evil hit UK, it sold out in the UK quicker than it did in America because we got country houses galore and we know all.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, particularly if you live like in the country, like Casey visits me where I live quite often. We don't have to walk very far from my house to find a building that is as old as the sort of place that Casey's talking about. You know, and you could say
like
that could be a mansion with a zombie lab underneath. You know, you can find them in
easily.
A 15-minute walk. But like you said, in America, you're never gonna find a building like that.
No,
of
course.
What do you have in America? You have small abandoned towns.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen King's pretty much made an entire career writing about the east coast of Maine in his books. You've got so many small towns where just weird stuff could happen.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Silent Hill, the original Silent Hill, is actually based on a real town in the US, Centralia.
That's amazing. I need to check that out.
Yeah, Centralia. The Hideo Kojima, who is obviously the auteur behind Silent Hill, was visiting the US, and he actually went and visited Centralia, which is this old mining town where there's been a coal fire burning underneath the town since
Oh
the 1960s.
yes, I remember reading this. Yeah, so there's like constantly ash, isn't there?
That's right. It's totally abandoned. You can't go there without a guide because parts of the floor will fall away. There's poisonous gas erupting all over the place, and the fire is still burning in the coal mines underneath the town and has been since the 1960s. So that's where the notion of the mist comes from.
That makes a lot more sense. I always thought it was fog because it was like fog coming in off the sea.
Right. It's the story of Centralia is well worth checking out. There's a couple of documentaries about it on YouTube that chart the entire history, and it's absolutely fascinating. But that's where like the central imagery and concept of Silent Hill come from.
I will definitely be checking that out. I didn't know that.
So you're right, it is kind of more a classically American story, isn't it?
That's the point of the Ice Nine Kills guy. That's what he said, in that Japan will just accept anything as a whole because they're like that. In Europe, Resident Evil did way better because we've got this historical concept of...
So sort of, like the more gothic tradition, yeah?
That doesn't really hold after the first one, though, does it? I mean,
it doesn't.
Resident Evil 0 goes back to... Is it the same mansion or a different mansion?
It's both, actually. You start off... There's two sites, basically. So there's an outer site, which is where you start out, and then by the end of the game, you actually end up back in the Spencer mansion.
Right. But other than that, Resident Evil series doesn't really have this gothic tradition, does it? It's only...
No, I mean, there's elements of it in the police station and Resident Evil.
Oh, no, of course. But I mean, in terms of the location, it's like a police station in a city, or just a city, or a little weird little town in the country. It's all, this is stuff which could, this is American stuff now, isn't it?
Yeah, it shifts the style of horror from Resi 1 to Resi 2. Resi 1 definitely has that slightly sort of Edgar Allan Poe thing going on with the Gothic mansion and whatnot. But Resi 2 changes it up and makes it moves from being Night of the Living Dead to being Dawn of the Dead, basically. So it makes it urban horror.
The film that it got compared to, which was one of my favourite films at the time, was Assault on 79. And there's these huge elements of that film in Resident Evil 2. As the name suggests, basically it's an inner-city police station that's been shut down. And on this night, they've got a gang leader in the cells, and his entire gang assault. It's sort of like a Warriors-style production.
The Assault on Precinct 9, yeah.
To break him out, and that lended very heavily to Resident Evil 2. But yeah, it was very different from the first one, for sure.
It's that sense of being under siege, isn't it? I mean, you do get that in Resi 1 a little bit because you've got the dogs outside, but it's not quite the same. In Resi 2, you really do get this feeling that if you don't hurry up, the zombies are going to get in, yeah?
It's the time, really. You have to get out somehow.
It's kind of like flipping the switch, isn't it? Because in the first one, you're trapped in a location with these things. Yeah. On the second one, you're not trapped, but they're everywhere. So
right.
It's kind of like, yes, you can run around the whole city, but they are in every street, every shop, every building you're going to go in. It's like you're no longer trapped, but that's kind of worse in a way,
It's a
because
fair
at least
point, actually. They kind of invert the scenario a little bit, don't they?
Yeah, because the mansion, like I said before, you could arguably, if you get far enough away from it, you're all right. Whereas on Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 2, you don't feel as if you can get away.
No, there's nowhere to go, is there? Because the entirety of Raccoon City has been completely infested with not just zombies, but everything else as well.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a question that I don't think they've ever answered, you know. I don't think they've ever introduced a bit of lore that answers this. How is it that the player characters, the main characters in Resident Evil, have never caught the fucking virus? Because they're encountering these things all the time. They're in the environments where the virus is loose. They're getting bitten by the zombies and by the dogs and whatnot. So how is it the main characters have never caught the virus?
I had a belief about this for about 2 years. It was when I found out about the game. My friends were really into it, and as teenage boys, if they didn't know the answer to something, they just made it up.
Yeah, right.
So I had a couple. I'd played through the game maybe 20 or 30 times before I even clicked on, hey, these guys are talking shit to me. But they mentioned a cure at one point in the game, and you do synthesize a cure. I can't remember which.
You do at one point, yes.
I've got a feeling it's in Resi 2, but I don't quote me on that. But it's a completely curable thing. But before having the PlayStation and the game or anything like that, that was one of my first questions. So I was getting bit, and then you just like rubber plant into it, and it's how's he not a zombie? Because I was going from.
Yeah, is there like a genetic immunity or something?
The other side of that, if it's as easy as use one of these green plants, then why don't everyone just get one of these green plants?
Yeah. I mean, that's another really good sort of example of a video game element. You know, just rub this plant on the wound and you'll be fine.
Off the top of my head, just thinking about it, I think I can explain it, but it's not canon. It's just headcanon. There's a they say in the films, there's a book series as well by S.D. Perry. Check that out for some memory. In the films, the games, and that book series, they all mention the same thing, that the original virus has got a very short life. Okay. So, if at the beginning of the first film and about a quarter of the way into the second game, you see the virus getting unleashed, and if it infects something very quickly, it dissipates and dies off.
Right, okay. That actually does make sense, and it makes sense in the sense that it's a bioweapon, yeah?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want it lingering around, would you? You know, if you used it, you wouldn't want it lingering around. You'd want it to do the damage and then
leave,
Yeah, that makes sense.
So no one, again, if anyone hears this and says differently, then please pull me up on this.
Is there an in-canon, in-game lore that explains why Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and all the sundry others don't get the T-virus?
I'm going to jump on this. First off, there's G and T-virus. I reckon G-virus isn't actually infectious.
It seems like the G-virus, you need to be injected with it.
Yeah, even if that involves Birkin himself, like injecting you with his own limbs, but you can't catch it from being bled on or bit or anything like that. No.
The life of the virus in the game is explained in Resident Evil 2 in the flashback, and rats. They steal it. It ends up in the cellar. It ends up in the sewers.
Yeah.
Break into the case. It's crushed and broken up anyway. They eat it, and then that takes into the water supply. I reckon because it's alive in them in the water supply, it stays around. Everyone then drinks it, becomes a zombie. I don't think then that they're infectious. So therefore, Leon can get bit to shit, and provided he doesn't actually bleed out, because he does nearly bleed out at one point, he gets shot and recovered. The actual biting could kill him, but I don't think the bite and infection itself would kill him.
Right, interesting. Because I was wondering, like, maybe, I don't know, is there some nonsense explanation about them being genetically immune or something stupid like that?
I bet the big piece of tofu's genetically immune.
I bet it is. It hasn't got the systems, has it? It hasn't got the biological systems to be infected.
He's got a knife and gloves.
Brilliant. God, the tofu section. Bloody hell. There were loads of those. Loads of little secrets in Resident Evil 2 if you completed the game under particular parameters.
Yeah, that had so much. There was this great engine whereby what you did in one affected the other. So if you picked up the submachine gun to fight whatever enemy you're going to go up against, it wasn't there in the next one.
Right, okay, that's cool.
That is good, yeah.
Also, it ran out, but you kept holding it was the only weapon that was percentage based. I think the flamethrower and the submachine gun were percentage based once you got to 0.
Right.
And out. And at one point after it's run out, you can put the gun on a hook on the wall and it opens half of one door. And then when you just leave it, you never touch that ever again in the game. But when you do the other character's scenario, that gun is on the wall. It's empty and it's done one part of the puzzle for you to do.
It's put the weight on the hook, yeah.
That's very cool. I like that a lot.
And there was another section as well about inputting codes or something. I can't remember where it opened up. But there were various things whereby if you did something, it didn't serve a single purpose in your game, but you could do something in the next game to open up.
Very cool, I love that. There was also the thing in Resi 2 with Brad Vickers as well, wasn't there? You could actually, if you reached the police station without picking anything up, without getting hit or without killing anything, you could find Brad Vickers from the first game as a zombie.
Yeah, and that's where it ties over to 3, because in 3 you see him being infected. And
you actually see him getting nemesis.
Yeah, well, that going back to your point about the virus, I reckon that is how the T virus is contagious. They actually have to have it physically inserted into them.
Right, okay, by some sort of protuberance or something. Because he actually gets Nemesis's tentacle through his mouth, doesn't he?
Yeah, and it puts something inside him, and that kills him. But later on, you get him, they do it in this one, and they do it in 4 as well. You actually get infected with something inside you. And it's not like a bite that becomes infected, it's a physical parasite that's got inside.
Oh, yes, I remember. You actually get injected with it, don't you?
Yeah, they have to manually put something in you, yeah.
And
Grenados.
But
they're not made by Umbrella, are they, then, on Resident Evil 4?
No, the Grenados, they're actually found in an archaeological dig.
Yeah.
They're creatures. They're like some species of life that's preserved and fossilized. But the minute that they're on Earth, they're a bit like the Thing. You know, they start to rejuvenate and start to infect people, and that's
all those actual worms that they found in the Arctic. in real life, they've genuinely found some that as soon as they've defrosted them, they've come back alive.
Right.
And we've been in permafrost for like 100 million years.
Look, horror fiction and horror video games have warned people about this, you know. People have been told.
Yeah, we've all heard the warnings, but people still do it, don't they?
These archaeologists, I'm telling you, dear me.
We had that black coffin a couple of years ago. Do you remember that? They dug up that black coffin in Egypt, didn't they?
Yeah,
it was miles away from any civilization. It was not buried in a proper marked grave. It was like about 7 inches thicker than a normal Egyptian coffin would be, and it was solid black granite instead of the usual sandstone. And first thought is, let's open this.
Yeah, let's not, eh?
It was full of the mysterious red liquid, and the person that opened it was like, I want to drink it.
Has anyone got any straws?
Oh god! They tried to sell it, didn't they? The liquid. Yeah.
That's. If we jump forward like 3 years' time and humanity's wiped out, that's going to be why.
Yeah, it's not going to be COVID-19. It's going to be that thing.
Someone unleashed it. We got Trump as president. We got Brexit. We've got COVID-19. What else?
I was going to say, what else? I mean, at this point, what else?
Korea and Vietnam look like they're about to kick off. Trump is clearly going to cause a war with Iraq. So, war, dictator, famine, pestilence.
You're counting the horsemen, though. God, you could almost handle zombies, couldn't you? You know, you could handle a T-virus outbreak at this point.
I'd be hard-pressed to differentiate between some of the people I meet in real life, to be honest with you.
I think a zombie infection thing would actually be much easier to contain than an actual disease like the COVID-19.
Like COVID.
Because
yeah,
you can see
absolutely.
who's walking around with it. It's blatantly obvious.
You know, it's fairly obvious.
And there's less morals when you say, let's kill all the people who've got it. People don't like that when you say it about a flu virus, but when it's zombies, people generally agree with you.
Yeah, they generally go for that one, don't they?
Just round up everyone who's got it and set them on fire, and you'd be done with it with zombies. But it's not that easy with something else.
Not like this, no. It's much more difficult. But here's a question: after the remake of Resi 3, where are they going to go?
I spoke to Casey about this the other day, and I said I kind of hope they do Veronica, because I have no knowledge of that game beyond people saying it's not great, and I would quite like to just see what it's about. To be honest.
Well, maybe what they could do, if they do go to Code Veronica next, which narratively would make sense.
Well, they're not going to do Resident Evil 4 because it had a remake a couple of years ago.
Right.
Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil GameCube are both pretty new, relatively speaking. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be. I think Veronica kind of is the next obvious one.
It's the obvious go-to, isn't it? And you know what? Since it's one of the sort of earlier Resi games that isn't that great, maybe they could rejig it quite significantly to make it work.
I reckon so, yeah.
I have a different view. On this. One thing we've briefly mentioned the films. I just mentioned them earlier. The SD Perry did a great series, and they weren't quite novelizations. They went like hit one, miss one. So 0 was obviously 0, 1 was 1, 2 was 2, 3 was 3. 4 hadn't been done yet. They came between the 3 and 4. So for 4, they started off on their own what if.
Right. Okay.
So the arc that they did was that at the end of 3, the city didn't get blown up. The city survived.
Right, okay.
And people went back in and reclaimed it. The US government basically said it was a terrorist attack, that it was carried out by the members of STARS.
Oh, okay.
So rather than, like, in the film, it basically goes into a doomsday thing whereby the planet becomes a dead planet. In the games, the hero saves the day, basically. In the books, even though they were sort of like young adult books, they weren't quite adults. There was gore and death and sex in them, but only in moderation.
Right.
They went down this point of view as like they've just got, it's sort of like a Vietnam thing. They've just got out of this event that's locked down a city for a couple of years, and then now they're wanted. They're like the Taliban. Umbrella.
Oh, that's interesting.
Umbrella's got this massive press corps. You know, they're part of everything. You see it in Resident Evil 3. You see them selling like paracetamol as well as you see them doing biological research angle. But they basically insinuate that the outbreak was caused by the STARS team, like a disgruntled paramilitary thing. They're ideally suited. They've got access to all of it. They were building it. If I remember correctly, they were building it in the lab, and it got leaked and went out from there on. They attacked the city. They're now America's most wanted, and the rest of the books from there on are told from the point of view where they're like a guerrilla force trying to break into Umbrella Labs to get evidence for it.
That's interesting. That could be a really, really interesting way to take it, actually. Yeah, I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
I could definitely see that. I mean, in that instance, maybe what they should do is leap forward and leap to after Resi 7 and go for a Resi 8.
They don't even need to do that, though. They could do, like, you know how the Terminator films, like, every third film basically picks up from the second one? Well, we've now had a new Resident Evil 2. We're going to have a new Resident Evil 3. It could basically forget that any of the others exist and just do a new Resident Evil 4. Not call it Resident Evil 4, because that exists, but whatever comes next is, you know, Resident Evil 4B. You know, this is a different version of what could have come next instead of the other one.
With what's the Marvel universe that does this? Ultimate Marvel.
Yeah, the Ultimate Marvel universe.
Yeah. Wherefore anyone non-familiar with it, it's basically after 60 or 70 years of Marvel and plots and people coming back from the dead. They're like, let's just simplify it. Let's pretend it starts in the past 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
and go from there, and keep all the good stuff and get rid of all the crap that we have tied ourselves in knots trying to explain. And it works really, really well. I think a version of that, so in terms of gameplay, something like a Splinter Cell style game where you're infiltrating, because the whole idea of them being a covert group is a framework just for the stories. So it's basically like, okay, in this one, Leon and Barry, who are two characters that have never met, now you get to see them team up and go and go to a sea lab sort of thing and fight loads of sea stuff in there. There was one where they go to an underground lab, and it's sort of like Crystal Maze, where there's a desert area and a city area, and they have to fight those. And they're clearly just designed like what is going to fire up the imagination of 15, 16-year-old lads that they're going to think, that's cool, whilst carrying on this idea. And that only happened in those books. I think there's only 6 or 7 of the books. I didn't get to the end of them because I'd outgrown them by the time they finished release. But they were great. They took it on a different... they did different things with the creatures as well, so the stuff that we ended up... There were elements of it in later games. So in 4 and 7 you find out that Chris and Leon are part of a paramilitary force that's sent in covertly to try and stamp down on these things. You encounter like the bad versions of those people in the books. The whole idea at the beginning of 4 of him just going in and really knowing what's happening and him just being like, I'm kind of experienced in this, I'm just going to sort it out. That's sort of what the bad guys of the Resident Evil like. And who was the guy that was really good with knives in 4 that you fight?
Oh, Krieger, is that his name?
Yeah, you meet a few characters like that, and you also meet like the... I got over-infected at the end with a biological thing, but you beat like a form of zombie that can do very basic tasks, so it can like hold a gun and fire if it sees something. So they come up against these sort of creatures in the book series, and they go down a different route of like, what if they didn't break the story? What if they're still under oppression? What if they're still, selling like illegal phones to make $200 so they can buy a gun so they can investigate this house that's on the edge of town? They go down the sort of realm and they keep it very, very small scale, and I really liked how that worked and played out.
Yeah, that could be really interesting, actually. I mean, what has happened as a result of like the success of these games? I mean, how quickly did they throw out Resi 3? The remake. I mean, it's within a year.
The second one was immediately picked up and people were like, "Oh, this is amazing!" So then they immediately. I think they led. I don't think there was even a break in projects there between the team working on 2 and then 3. They pretty much straight away went into it.
I think it was a runaway and massively surprising success, and as a result of that, we've now got this renaissance in survival horror. It's coming back again.
I still think they ought to do a Silent Hill remake like that.
There's talks happening.
Not another one, not Silent Hill 723, but
no.
First from scratch.
I mean, obviously after the split between Konami and Hideo Kojima, everyone thought that's it, that's the end of Silent Hill, it's dead. There will never be another one. Sony are in talks with Konami to buy the rights.
Okay.
And they're talking about creating a remake of Silent Hills 1 and 2.
That would be good. Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I would like that, because, again, the first one's one of them that you can't really go back and play it now.
No. But, I mean, it was amazing at the time. The ideas are amazing, the imagery is amazing, but trying to play it now, especially with the shonky voice acting, it's just like, no.
Yes.
No. But there's still so much potential in Silent Hill. I mean, if they can throw the same passion and the same inspiration at Silent Hill as Capcom have at Resident Evil, it could be amazing. It could be just the most beautiful horror game.
Very much.
I think if they listen to the fans, rather than go down the route that Resident Evil went, which was what is selling, what technology do we have. I think Gears of War came out around the time of 5 and 6.
Yes, absolutely.
And that game clearly had a massive influence on 5 and 6, which turned me off of them.
Likewise. I mean, all I want from a Resi game, I want a horror experience, yeah? I don't really want an action oriented experience.
If they say to Silent Hill fans, what did you like most about the original game? Rather than trying to appeal now, I don't know what the current in vogue thing is, but like in-game purchases or DLC, anything like that, could just skip past that and go, what was the 5 core things that you loved about Silent Hill? Let's just build around that. I think they're on.
But there's even rumblings of other horror franchises from the same era. Do either of you remember Shadow Man?
Yeah, I remember that on the GameCube.
Yeah.
It was a Voodoo one, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, well, that's being remade too.
Okay. I can't remember much about that, but I have vague memories. I know what it was, I can picture it, I remember the game, I had it, but I can't remember a great deal about the story or anything like that.
It's flawed, but it's very interesting. It
was like flickering between the world of the living and the dead, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So you could in the living world you were just a normal man. In the dead side world you were Shadow Man, so you were much more powerful. But it had a more sort of adventure game feeling about it. So it's a bit more like a bit like The Legend of Zelda or something like that. So you had vast environments, and you had to like gain different abilities to open up different areas. And the horror was much more sort of metaphysical, but it was quite good. I mean, it had issues, but it was quite good. Updating it could be amazing.
I'm not familiar with that.
But it seems to have all come on the back of the success of the Resident Evil 2 remake.
Well, that's good that it's done that. I just hope they don't milk it too far, which is always what happens with things like this.
Well, that's what happened to survival horror itself. I mean, it got to the point where it was just cliche. You know, if a game was released in the survival horror genre, people knew what it was.
Yeah.
And therefore, it wasn't frightening at all. It had no atmosphere. And interestingly, that gave rise to different types of horror. So let's see what happens. I mean, at the moment, there seems to be a bit of a renaissance happening in horror video gaming in general. We've also got System Shock 3 coming out very soon. And I don't know whether either of you are familiar with the original System Shock games.
No, I'm not,
No? They were PC exclusive games from the original one was around the same time as Doom, and the last one, System Shock 2, was around the year 2000. They were made by the same creative team that made BioShock.
Right.
And System Shock 2 is almost like the father or the parent of BioShock. BioShock, it's the same gameplay, it's exactly the same style of game, but System Shock 2 is much more sincerely horror based.
Right.
It was a terrifying experience, and there's a sequel. There's a System Shock 3 coming out very soon. It does feel like we're getting there's a new breed of horror games erupting at the moment, which is wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
I'm just thinking about what you were saying about the renaissance of survival horror. The only one from back in the day that I could say that's a survival horror and that could do with a remake would be Parasite Eve.
Parasite Eve, oh my god, yeah. That would be very interesting. That sort of that hybrid thing that it has going on, where it's part RPG and part survival horror.
Yeah, I've seen Fat Friends play it. Again, it was one of those where I'd go and watch my friends play and be like, I don't get what the fuck's going on.
Yeah, right. Because it is very Japanese, isn't it? It's like very Japanese in the sense that it's like watching one of those very badly translated anime where it's like I have no clue as to why that's happening.
All your base RRs, 4,000, that sort of thing.
Very much so. But at the same time, it's really interesting and the gameplay is fantastic.
Yeah, it was ahead of its time, and the bits that worked really worked.
Really worked. It's the stuff that doesn't work is when they're trying to explain what's happening. The dialogue is like I don't know what you're talking about.
What's happening? You know what's going on.
Right? But the game is great, and yeah, to see a remake of that would be fantastic.
Yeah, the more story, like what Lex was saying about Silent Hill, take away all the oddness and get all the present age well. Just take the core elements of Parasite Eve and you've got a great survival.
Yeah, absolutely. And given, I mean, that was a SquareSoft game, so given that we've got the Final Fantasy VII remake coming out very soon, there's no reason why that shouldn't happen.
No, not at all. And if you expand beyond survival horror, if you look at Metal Gear Solid, everyone knows that for a PlayStation one, but prior to that, that was there were 2 or 3 games out. I'm not told.
Yep.
And they waited 10 years or so before they just said, right, let's try a new one in this modern way of gaming, which was PlayStation 1 from there on. And that's still that's a thriving franchise today.
Yep.
Because someone put it on a completely different format of looking at it. There's no we couldn't do that with what was ones you just said, Shell Shock.
Oh, System Shock. Yeah, there's no reason whatsoever. I'm very much looking forward to that. Very much looking forward to it. There's even, apparently, there are rumblings of a new BioShock coming out.
Yeah.
Which surprises me.
I'm not sure that's necessary. I think they're kind of done, aren't they?
After, did you play BioShock Infinite?
I did.
So you know, like, the metaphysics of this universe and the way it works.
Yeah, but I think leaving it at that is enough. I don't think then is like the ending is what it is. I think then diving into that is a bit. Yeah, okay. I just think it's hard to explain, but like, yeah, okay. So what you're saying is that there's an infinite number of realities. So you could make an infinite number of stories set in this universe. Fine. That doesn't mean you have to. You know, it's better to just leave it now. You've done 3 brilliant games, and you know.
Do you know the problem they're going to have if they do a new BioShock? It's doing something that in any way equals the scope and scale of what happens at the end of Infinite.
Yeah. Yeah, because...
How do you do it? How do you do it? Because Infinite is, as its name implies...
But that's bringing that back round, though, that's kind of what Resident Evil 7 did. Because Resident Evil 6 ended up in this, like... You know, the events that were happening were of like an apocalyptic scale. You had monsters that were like approaching kaiju size of monsters, and it was like, you know, flying in a helicopter using a minigun to fight them, sort of stuff. But then Resident Evil 7 went right back to one guy trapped in a farmhouse in the middle of a swampy area with 7 people who were mutated, and it just really stripped it right back down to a small scale of it. And just all that other shit happens, but it doesn't affect this. It's just in the background of this.
Yeah, it makes the horror intimate again, doesn't it? It makes it personal again, which actually makes the title make more sense.
I liked it. Yeah, I mean the resident aspect of it. Yeah, I mean
the resident aspect.
It's just. It's a ship that crashes with some umbrella shit on board.
That's it.
But I mean, this is something that we spoke about on the Colour Out of Space podcast. But one of the most horrific elements on 7 for me was the fact that when you uncover the evidence to suggest that this family was actually really nice to start with. They were not some like hick family like, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This was a nice, happy, normal family who got infected and corrupted by this weapon. The reason they went to that ship in the first place was to try and help people who were in the crash.
Yeah.
You know,
it's
and
very
that's just
clever,
so much more tragic when you realise that.
Yeah, it's very clever because the way the game frames them, it leads you to make certain assumptions based on your experience. You know, it leads you to assume that they are like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, but then you find out, no, they're not. They're actually, this is like the Flanders family getting
these are really good people. Yeah, these are good people. Yeah,
some zombies, I see.
It's as soon as you realise that, you think, oh fuck, this is awful.
Yeah, that was actually one of the best parts of 7 for me. When when you have that weird like flashback where you get to see them as they were.
Yeah, it completely flips the script on what you've got here.
Oh, it makes you feel guilty as well, doesn't it? You know.
Yeah, because they're now like, oh, these are people who've got a disease. These aren't awful people who now happen to have grown some extra limbs and stuff. This is This is a disease now. I'm now fighting people who've got a disease that they are in no more control of than someone who's contracted AIDS or something. It's
it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true, and it's actually a really clever story element in Resi 7. I've got to say.
But that thing of stripping it right back down to a small thing, I think that is how future elements for most horror franchises would need to do it. So Silent Hill would need to go back to one guy traveling to Silent Hill to find his kid. BioShock would be one small story in one of the Rapture universes.
Yeah.
You know, just strip everything right back down to the core element of it.
That's a good idea, actually. Yeah, capture the essential spirit of what made them popular in the first place. That's not a bad idea at all.
I think that's where Metal Gear Solid tried and failed. They, by the time we got in the newer ones, I think it was about 5 I got. When I had an Xbox, I had Xbox Live, so you got the free game every second week. And they gave me, I think it was Sons of Patriot. The whole game's only like an hour long. Because they had no idea what to do, and it's just Solid Snake sneaking up on guards for an hour, and then the game's done. And apparently,
that's it. Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, that's the danger, isn't it? That's the danger that these franchises play themselves out, which I imagine will happen. It will happen with like Resident Evil again, because it's almost its nature, isn't it? It's cyclical, you know.
I'll tell you what's a good way out for them that they haven't done yet. Resident Evil Go-Kart. Oh, Resident Evil Tennis.
Yeah,
Resi Tennis. That'd be fun.
Birkin's hand could just be a racket.
Oh,
so like you wouldn't
Birkin
even need
would be amazing at it. Yeah, Birkin would be amazing at it, but the zombies would be a bit shit.
Yeah. I'd play Resident Evil Go-Kart. I'd play that.
Yeah, but guys, I mean, I think we've exhausted that one. Have you guys got any like closing thoughts on the Resi franchise?
Just that I am going to get Resident Evil 3, and I will probably be bugging Casey saying, "Does this happen on the original version?"
like George, I don't know how much Lex has said when he goes, "I've got a friend coming on to talk about it." But Resident Evil for me, I'm a musician. I've been in my current band for about 12 years now, and we do all right. Because of our particular age group and the people that we play from, from as soon as you can get into a big write-up and speak to people in the 70s or 80s. And a lot of the older end knocking a lot of the younger end. What you guys do is a sort of rock music that we miss from when we were younger. And the younger end like it because they're like, oh, you're doing an older thing, you're the other way. And my argument against the older side has always been like, look at what the young lot are doing now.
Yeah, right.
You're not done with rock. Rock didn't stop at a time. It's a different version now. And you can.
Yeah.
When it comes to video games, I'm complete the opposite side.
Right. Okay.
So Lex hits me up with like, check this out on the new one. I'm like, it's not the '96 original.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 2 remake. So what? I've probably still got the knackered double disc from 1998, and every version of horror that's come out since then, newer games have got, to me, has always just been a bit like you're trying to be Resident Evil. Therefore, for me, Resident Evil is very much that's my old man gene kicking in. That's where I've gone. It's not like it was when I was a kid. New music, new technology, new places, new adventures, new people. Even if aliens from another planet, I can accept all of that. But if anyone tells me that survival horror has got better since Resident Evil 2 and 3, then I'm going to argue till I die. Because my old man gene has kicked in, and Resident Evil is the undisputed king of survival horror. That's where I'm ending it.
Wow, I mean that's a statement to end on. I think that is a brilliant statement. I really don't know what to say other than what we really have. It's a Resident Evil, like, for those of us who were kids or teenagers at the time Resident Evil came out, it was epoch making.
Yeah, if you were that disaffected youth that didn't have any friends but was really into film, It was there. It was everything you wanted. It was an immersive story. You play it, and it had elements. It wasn't like computer games were like at the time, and then suddenly you've got this 18 rated game, blood and violence and gore. It was
Oh, it blew our tiny little minds, didn't it?
Yeah, I think that in a way, that an intelligent way, because obviously you got Doom, which was just shoot everything and explode it, but this was suddenly a horror and an adult game in an intelligent way, which was revolutionary.
Yeah.
So then, we've settled it. Resident Evil is the king of the survival horror.
It was an incredible experience. I mean, you know, some of us we would like move on to other things in the end. I mean, for me, I love Resi to bits, I really do, but Silent Hill is more my kind of horror.
Same here, actually. It is for me, actually.
So when that came out, that just it swallowed my soul completely. It really did. It swallowed my soul. And since then, there's been System Shock, there's been Bioshock, there's been the Bloodborne games, Amnesia. But without Resident Evil, you don't have any of this. There's no market for it.
Resident Evil will always be. It's like your first girlfriend. It's the first person that you sleep with, the first person you do, and it will always be that for me. It's not perfect. It wasn't right. And if I encountered it now, I don't think I'd want to encounter it now as it was, because it would be.
It's locky and the controls are a bit weird.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. That I have for it. It's encapsulated in that feeling. It's like your first girlfriend. It's like there'll be more since. You'll just never get over that first one. You'll never change those feelings of that first one.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of putting it, actually, because we just didn't have the context for it, did we? When we were the kids who had grown up with things like the Super Nintendo, with the Mega Drive, with the Commodore Amiga, the Spectrum, whatever, we just didn't have context for it. It was a new thing. And it was incredible. The experience of being a child or a teenager at that time was absolutely insane.
Yeah, and it's tied in with lots of thoughts of like it was the first time I was playing computer games full stop.
Yeah, of course. But just to conclude, guys, is there anything that you'd like to pimp out?
I do mine every time, so just put my booklink thing on your Amazon one. But you've got some new listeners here who might not have heard of the band Casey, so push that out.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, if we're going to push on one thing, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a punk rock musician in a band from Leeds called the Idle Dead. We're into year 12 of doing this now, so we're just finishing up album 5. And once this, they call it coronavirus, I think just for tonight we can call it the T-virus. Once the T-virus is...
just for tonight.
Once it's done doing what it's done, we're going to be heading straight into the studio to do album 5. We're completely independent and fan-funded. We did a big rise on Pledge Music before that all crumbled, and we think we've got the next chapter figured out. We think we know how we're going to do it without having to sell our souls. So that's going to be going down in the next few months. So the Idle Dead, IDOLDEAD on all socials.
Brilliant. I'll put Casey, if you can send Lex some links, I'll put those in the description below, guys. So if you want to go and check them out, please do.
Thank you.
No problem at all. As for me, just the usual, guys. You can find my stuff. You can find my short stories over at strangeplaygrounds.com, and you can find me knocking about here on Exaggerated Elegy. And if you want to hit me up, you can find me at Enigmatic Elegy on Twitter. Thank you guys for listening, and thank you guys for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. It's been great fun.
No problem at all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.